It started on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind of day that begins with a rush, emails waiting, coffee going cold, traffic lights that never seem to turn green. Aiden sat at his desk, staring at the endless to-do list glowing on his screen. Deadlines, meetings, expectations, all stacked like invisible weights on his chest. He reached for his watch, the one he'd worn for years, and noticed something strange. The hands had stopped moving, frozen. For a moment he felt annoyed, then uneasy. How long had it been stopped? An hour? A day? He couldn't tell. And yet, in that silence between ticks, something inside him softened. The world outside was still spinning, but his small circle of time had paused. He felt, for the first time in months, the air filling his lungs without effort, the faint hum of life continuing, without him trying to control it. Maybe that was the point all along, that time doesn't need our permission to pass, and peace doesn't wait for the perfect moment to arrive. If this moment already feels peaceful to you, let it be a small reminder. Peace like this is always here, waiting. And if you wish to return to this calm again, you can simply subscribe, so each new story finds its way gently back to your night. In the Buddha's teaching, this moment has a name: the present, the only place where freedom can truly exist. But most of us, like Aiden, live as if peace is scheduled for later. After success, after approval, after everything feels enough. Tonight, let's walk with him, and perhaps with the part of you that's still racing against the clock, into a slower rhythm, where letting go is not about losing time but finally discovering it. And so, the story begins, the day Aiden's clock stopped and his heart started to listen. Aiden and the stopped clock. Aiden didn't remember when life became a race, only that he had been running for as long as he could remember. Every morning began the same way: the alarm at 6 a.m., the quick shower, the bitter coffee gulped while scanning his phone for messages that had piled up overnight. He didn't wake up anymore. He activated. His friends often joked that he was married to his work, but even that sounded too romantic. Marriage implied love, connection, some sense of purpose. What Aiden felt was more like survival, the constant, dull pressure to keep up. He believed, like so many of us do, that peace was waiting on the other side of completion, the next promotion, the perfect relationship, the approval of people who never seemed to notice his effort. Once I get there, he would tell himself, then I can rest. But there kept moving. That morning, when his watch stopped, he felt something inside him pause too. He tried to wind it, tapped the glass, even shook his wrist as if time could be bullied into obedience. Nothing. The hands stood still. 7:43 a.m., frozen mid-stride, just like him. He sighed, slipped it off and set it on his desk. Yet somehow he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. There was something hauntingly peaceful about it. A watch that refused to hurry. That night, Aiden stayed at the office long after everyone had left. The city outside was quiet, a soft hum of distant traffic. The stopped clock sat under the pale glow of his desk lamp. He stared at it for a long time, and something inside whispered, "What if you stopped too?" The thought startled him. Stopped. He didn't even know what that meant anymore. He looked around the office, the spotless glass walls, the neatly stacked reports, the glow of a computer that never seemed to rest. Everything felt sterile, perfect and lifeless. When was the last time he'd laughed without checking his phone? When was the last time he'd eaten without thinking about his next task? For years, he had mistaken movement for meaning. He was always busy, but rarely alive. The following weekend, his mother called. "You sound tired again, sweetheart," she said gently. He smiled faintly. "Just a busy season, Mom." "It's always a busy season," she replied. "You used to love building model airplanes when you were little. You'd sit for hours doing nothing but listening to music and gluing wings together. You were so peaceful back then." He laughed. "That was a long time ago." "Peace," she said softly, "is never a long time ago. It's only ever now." The words lingered in his mind for days. Peace is only ever now. One evening, after another long day of endless emails, Aiden found himself unable to open his laptop. His chest felt heavy, like something inside was begging him to stop. He went for a walk instead without his phone. It was early autumn. The air carried the faint smell of rain and fallen leaves. Each step crunched softly beneath his shoes, and for the first time in a long while, he noticed the rhythm of his breathing. Inhale, exhale. The same simple pattern that had kept him alive since birth. And he had never paid attention. He reached a small park he used to visit as a child. There was a wooden bench by the lake, the same one where he had once sat with his father, throwing stones into the still water. He sat down, took off his watch, and held it in his palm. It was still stuck at 7:43, but now it didn't bother him. He watched the ripples spreading across the lake from where a leaf had fallen. They grew wider, softer, then disappeared completely, only for another leaf to take its place. He suddenly thought of how much of life was like this, one ripple fading as another begins. And for the first time, he understood what impermanence meant. Everything changes, everything moves, except the moments we try too hard to hold still. That night, he read a line from a book he found online about Buddhist mindfulness. The more you grasp, the less you hold. Letting go is not losing. It is opening your hand to receive. He smiled. It reminded him of his broken watch, the one that stopped counting so he could finally start noticing. Days turned into weeks, and something subtle began to shift. He still worked, but he no longer raced. He began taking small breaks, not to check his phone, but to simply breathe. He noticed the sound of the office air conditioning, the laughter from a co-worker down the hall, the warmth of sunlight reflecting on his desk. Each time the urge to rush returned, he would glance at the stopped watch and remember, not every second needs to be filled. He started to realize that life had been waiting patiently for him to slow down, to catch up, not with success, but with himself. One evening, he stayed late again, but this time not from pressure, from peace. He opened the window, letting the night air drift in. The city lights shimmered below, like millions of tiny candles flickering across the skyline. He whispered to himself, maybe peace isn't something to earn. Maybe it's something to notice. He smiled, a real smile, not the polite one he wore in meetings. And just then, he heard a faint tick. His heart skipped. He looked down. The watch on his wrist had started moving again. 44, he laughed quietly. It wasn't magic, it was movement. The smallest reminder that life never truly stops. It only waits for us to return to it. That night, Aiden wrote in his journal, "When the clock stopped, I thought something was broken, But maybe it was me, and maybe stopping was how I learned to start again. He placed the watch beside his bed before sleeping, not as a reminder of time, but of stillness. Before closing his eyes, he remembered something his mother once said. Peace is never a long time ago. It's only ever now. He whispered those words into the dark room like a prayer, and for the first time in years, he drifted into sleep without planning tomorrow. We often believe that the world rewards the ones who run the fastest, but in truth, it blesses those who know when to stop. Because when you stop, even for a single breath, you begin to hear the quiet rhythm that's been guiding you all along. The rhythm of the present moment. And maybe, like Aiden, you'll realize that peace doesn't wait at the end of your schedule. It waits inside every second you're willing to live, not as a race, but as a pause. And sometimes, all it takes is for one small clock to stop so your heart can finally begin. When Aiden finally stopped racing against time, he discovered that peace was never something to chase. It was the stillness that had been waiting underneath all along. But while some people struggle to slow down, others get trapped in something quieter. The endless need to perfect what's already enough. If Aiden's lesson was about letting life move, the next one belongs to someone who couldn't stop trying to make everything flawless. Her name is Sofia, a woman who built beauty for a living, yet couldn't find it inside her own walls. And just like Aiden's clock, her story begins with something that refused to move forward. A room she could never finish. Sofia and the room that was never finished. Sofia loved order, clean lines, balanced colors, everything in its place, nothing left uncertain. Maybe that's why people hired her. As an interior designer, she was known for creating spaces that breathed calm into chaos, homes that looked perfect. But inside her own home, peace was the one thing she could never design. At the end of a long hallway in her apartment, there was a door she rarely opened. Behind it was the room, the one she had been redecorating for 3 years. She called it her practice room, but deep down she knew it was something else. It was her obsession. 6 shades of paint had covered those walls. 4 sets of curtains had come and gone. Every time she thought she was done, she found something to fix. A corner too sharp, a light too warm, a pattern too loud. Each improvement brought a new flaw into focus. Her friends teased her about it. "You're building a masterpiece no one will ever see." Sofia would just smile. "I'll show you when it's perfect." But perfect was a horizon that kept moving further away. One Sunday morning, her mother stopped by with fresh bread and that familiar look. Part love, part concern. As they drank tea in the kitchen, her mother's eyes wandered toward the closed door. "You're still working on that room?" Sofia nodded, a bit defensive. "It's almost done. I just want it to feel right." Her mother smiled softly. "Sometimes right just means real, you know." Sofia laughed awkwardly. "Real doesn't pay the bills, Mom." Her mother took her hand. "No, but it fills the heart. Don't decorate your life so much that you forget to live in it." The words stung. not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Sofia brushed them aside, pretending she didn't hear. But that evening, as she stood in the unfinished room surrounded by swatches and samples, her mother's voice echoed again in her mind. Don't decorate your life so much that you forget to live in it. She sighed and sat on the floor, feeling the cool wood beneath her palms. Outside, the city pulsed with sound. Cars, laughter, the hum of someone's music through a thin wall. But in her apartment, silence felt heavy, almost judgmental. That night, she couldn't sleep. Scrolling through her phone, she stumbled upon a talk from a Buddhist teacher. The monk spoke about the trap of perfection, how our endless effort to control beauty is just fear wearing makeup. He said, "We want things flawless because we fear what flaws reveal, that nothing stays and nothing truly belongs to us." Sofia froze. Her hands, her work, her whole career built on polishing impermanence. The monk continued, "Imperfection is not failure. It is the language of life itself. When you stop trying to fix everything, you begin to see the beauty that was always there." Tears welled in her eyes. She didn't cry from sadness. She cried because the words felt like coming home, like someone had just turned a light on inside her. The next morning, she walked into the unfinished room again. But this time, she didn't touch anything. She didn't reach for the measuring tape or the sketchbook. She simply stood there and looked, really looked. The streak of paint she once hated looked like a river running down the wall. The uneven curtains swayed in the light breeze. There was dust on the shelf, but also sunlight, dancing in tiny specks through the air. For the first time, she saw the room not as a failure, but as a mirror, a reflection of her own unfinished heart, trying so hard to look complete that it had forgotten how to be alive. She whispered to herself, "Maybe you don't need fixing. Maybe you just need space to breathe." Later that week, she met a new client, an elderly woman named Mrs. Andrews, who wanted help redesigning her late husband's study. "I can't bear to change it," the woman admitted, "but I can't bear to keep it the same either." Sofia felt something stir in her chest. "Maybe we don't have to erase him," she said gently. "Maybe we can make it new by letting him stay." They worked together all afternoon, not to erase the past, but to soften it. They moved the desk closer to the window where the light was kinder. They framed one of his old handwritten notes. The ink slightly faded, but the message still strong. Love is the one design that never goes out of style. When they finished, the woman stood in the doorway, tears glimmering in her eyes. "It's still his room," she whispered, "but it feels peaceful." Sofia smiled. Sometimes peace isn't about starting over. It's about letting what remains be enough. That night, she returned to her apartment and opened the door to her own unfinished room. It looked the same, except she didn't. She sat on the floor again, cross-legged, and let her hand rest on the wall. The imperfection no longer bothered her. In fact, it comforted her. Each flaw felt like proof of life, a conversation between effort and surrender. In that moment, She remembered something else from the monk's talk. Perfection is the attempt to stop time. But when you love what's imperfect, time finally loves you back. She closed her eyes and smiled. For years, she had been trying to stop time inside these four walls. But now, she could feel it flowing again, softly, like wind through open curtains. Weeks later, her friends visited and noticed the door open. They peeked in and gasped. "It's beautiful," one of them said. "Is it finished?" Sofia looked around and laughed, a sound lighter than she remembered herself capable of. "No," she said, "it's alive." From then on, Sofia's designs began to change. Her clients said her spaces felt warmer, more human. She stopped chasing perfection and started creating harmony. Each project became a meditation, a reminder that what truly matters isn't flawless, it's felt. She kept her unfinished room exactly as it was. Sometimes she'd sit there quietly at dawn, a cup of tea in hand, sunlight stretching across the imperfect wall. It reminded her that we are all, in our own way, works in progress. Unfinished rooms, unfinished hearts. And that's exactly how life intended it. In Buddhism, there's a quiet truth. Everything changes. Everything passes. The more you resist that, the heavier life becomes. But when you learn to bow before imperfection, not in defeat, but in reverence, life starts to bloom again. Sofia once believed that peace was a result of getting things right. Now she knows it's a result of loving things as they are. One evening, she called her mother. "Mom," she said softly, "you were right. Things aren't waiting to be perfect. They're waiting to be loved." Her mother smiled through the phone. "And you finally finished your room?" Sofia looked around, the warm glow of the sunset spilling over the uneven floor. "Yes," she whispered, "and it's perfectly unfinished." When Sofia learned to see beauty in what was incomplete, she stepped into a gentler truth, that peace doesn't come from control, but from compassion for what's still becoming. Yet for many of us, the struggle isn't perfection, it's comparison. Not with the room we've built, but with the reflection we see staring back at us. If Sofia's journey was about embracing imperfection, the next story belongs to someone who could never stop measuring himself against the world. His name is Eli, and his teacher was not another person, but his own shadow. Eli and the conversation with his shadow. Eli had always been talented. At least, that's what everyone told him. His teachers, his friends, his proud parents. But talent can be a strange blessing. It gives you wings, and then quietly teaches you to fear falling. By 28, Eli was a rising musician. His songs played in cafes, his followers grew online, and his performances filled small theaters with warm lights and applause. Yet after every show, when the audience left and the stage fell silent, a familiar ache returned, the whisper that said, it wasn't good enough. He would scroll through social media, comparing his life to other artists. More views, more fans, more praise. He would think, they're the real ones. I'm still pretending. And the next morning, he'd wake up determined to do better. not out of love for music, but out of fear of being forgotten. One night, after a performance that everyone else called brilliant, Eli sat alone backstage, unable to feel anything. The applause had faded, but the echo of his own thoughts was louder than ever. He looked into the mirror, stage light still glowing faintly, and said under his breath, "Who are you trying to be?" The reflection stared back at him. For a moment, it seemed almost alive, almost separate, and in the silence, something inside him shifted, like a door he didn't know existed had opened. He blinked, but when he looked again, he swore he saw the reflection move, not as a copy, but as if it had its own heartbeat. Then, quietly, the shadow in the mirror spoke. "You keep chasing me," it said. "Every note you play, every song you write. You think you're getting closer, but you never will." Eli froze. His heart raced. "This isn't real." "Neither is the person you're pretending to be," the shadow answered softly. Eli stared, breathless. "Who are you?" "I'm you," the reflection said. "The part you don't post, the part you hide beneath the noise. I'm the silence you refuse to listen to." He wanted to laugh it off. Maybe he was overtired, hallucinating, dreaming. But the voice wasn't cruel. It wasn't mocking. It was kind and painfully familiar. "You think success will make you whole," the shadow continued. "But you're building a house with no walls. Every compliment passes through you because you don't stay still long enough to receive it." Eli swallowed hard. "I just want to be good enough." The reflection tilted its head. Good enough for whom? That question landed like a stone in water. Deep, quiet, endless ripples. He sat in front of the mirror for what felt like hours, listening to the voice that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. It spoke of all the things Eli had been avoiding. The jealousy he felt when others succeeded, the shame when he failed, the exhaustion from constantly proving his worth. Finally, Eli whispered, "I'm tired." "I know," the shadow replied. "That's why I came back," Eli blinked. "Back? Do you remember when you first started playing?" The reflection asked. "You used to close your eyes and smile when the strings vibrated. You didn't care who listened. You just wanted to feel." Eli's throat tightened. He did remember, sitting on the floor of his childhood bedroom, strumming the same broken guitar, humming quietly into the night. The shadow smiled. "That's the real you, the one who plays, not to impress, but to remember." A tear slipped down Eli's cheek. "I've lost him," he whispered. "You can't lose what you are," the reflection said. "You've only forgotten." The mirror shimmered faintly, as if catching the light of something unseen, and Eli realized what this conversation truly was. Not magic, not madness, but a moment of meeting himself fully for the first time. The shadow wasn't his enemy, it was his mirror, the karma of his own mind, showing him what he'd sown through years of self-judgment and comparison. He had fed his ego with fear, and now it was simply reflecting back what he'd planted. In Buddhist teaching, this is called karma, not punishment, but the natural echo of our own energy. Days passed, and Eli couldn't forget that night. He began a quiet practice, sitting in front of the same mirror each evening, not to fix his reflection, but to see it. Some nights he smiled, some nights he cried, some nights he said nothing at all. Slowly, something softened. He began to feel compassion for the tired eyes staring back at him. He realized that the reflection wasn't asking for perfection. It was asking for forgiveness. One morning, while walking through the park, he overheard a group of children singing, off-key, chaotic, joyous. He stopped and listened. Their voices weren't polished, but they were alive, and he felt it again, that warmth he'd lost somewhere along the way. That night, he picked up his guitar, not for work, not for an audience, but for himself. The notes were simple, almost clumsy, but as they echoed through his small apartment, he felt something sacred return. Presence. He wasn't trying to reach anyone. He wasn't performing. He was being. As the melody faded, he whispered a quiet vow. No more chasing shadows, only light. He looked again into the mirror. The reflection was just a reflection now, silent, ordinary. But for the first time, he didn't need it to speak. He smiled at it instead. And though the shadow said nothing, he felt it smile back. That night, Eli wrote in his notebook, "I spent years comparing myself to others, only to discover I was never competing with them. I was running from myself, and peace began when I stopped." He placed the notebook beside his guitar, closed his eyes, and let sleep take him like a slow song. In the weeks that followed, Eli began sharing his music again. Not the songs he thought people wanted, but the ones that came straight from his quiet heart. To his surprise, those were the songs people loved most. They said they could feel the truth in them. But Eli no longer cared about the numbers, the likes, or the charts. He cared about the silence between notes, the space where his old self had finally exhaled. In one of his live shows, he told the audience a story, not about fame or failure, but about that night in front of the mirror. He said, "I used to think my reflection was my enemy, but it was just me, waiting to be seen." The crowd went quiet. Some smiled, some wiped their eyes, and for a brief, beautiful moment, Eli felt something deeper than applause. Connection. He bowed his head and whispered to himself, "May I never forget to listen to the silence again." In Buddhism, they say enlightenment isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming real. When you stop running from your own shadow, you realize it was never chasing you. It was walking beside you, patiently, waiting for you to turn around. Eli's story reminds us that sometimes the loudest noise we fight against is the one inside our own mind. And when we stop measuring, comparing, and proving, we start hearing a softer rhythm underneath it all. If Eli's awakening came through the mirror of self-acceptance, the next story unfolds on an even deeper stage, where identity dissolves completely, and the wave remembers it was never separate from the water. The wave who forgot it was water. There once was a wave who lived near the shore of a vast and beautiful ocean. She spent her days watching the others rise and fall, each wave racing toward the beach, crashing in brilliant foam, then disappearing. She loved the thrill of movement, the sparkle of sunlight on her crest, the applause of the wind that lifted her higher. But underneath all that excitement was a quiet fear, the fear of fading. What happens when I fall? She would ask the waves around her. Some laughed, some shrugged, some whispered, "No one knows." So she decided she would not fall. She would rise higher, shine brighter, last longer. She would become the perfect wave, and for a while she did. She learned how to ride the wind just right, how to catch the strongest currents. People on the shore pointed at her beauty. "Look at that one," they said, and she felt proud, until she looked down and saw another wave, bigger, brighter, rising beside her. Suddenly, her joy turned into worry. What if they stop noticing me? What if I fade before I've made my mark? The higher she rose, the more afraid she became of falling. One morning, as the sun painted gold across the sea, the wave looked toward the horizon and saw a storm forming. Dark clouds gathered, and soon the ocean swelled with restless power. The waves around her screamed with both terror and delight. For storms meant movement, and movement meant meaning. But this time she felt something different. Not excitement, but dread. The wind roared, and the water pulled her higher than ever before, until she saw the entire ocean spread beneath her, endless, boundless, alive. And in that breathtaking moment she thought, I'm so small. Then the wind dropped, and she began to fall, down, 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 tumbling, helpless, terrified. The wave screamed, I'm dying! I'm disappearing! But as she hit the surface again, something strange happened. There was no impact, no destruction, only stillness. She looked around. She was still here, not as a wave anymore, but as water. At first, she didn't understand. I've lost everything, she whispered. My shape, my name, my beauty. And then a voice, calm, ancient and kind, rose from the depths. You haven't lost anything, it said. You've just stopped pretending. Who are you? She asked. I am the ocean, the voice replied. And so are you, the wave trembled. But I was separate. I had my own form, my own life. The ocean laughed softly. Form is just a moment of expression. You were never apart, only appearing to be. She was silent for a long time. I thought I had to prove myself. I thought I had to last. The ocean whispered. Lasting was never the goal. Flowing was. Time passed, or maybe it didn't. Water doesn't count minutes. The wave began to remember. She remembered how it felt to rise and fall, but now she could see the rhythm underneath. A rhythm that had always been there, guiding her, shaping her, holding her. Every crash, every calm, every storm was just the ocean playing with itself, learning to know its own reflection. She drifted for a while, carried gently by the tides. Once, she saw a small new wave forming nearby, bright, eager, trembling with excitement. Look at me, the young wave cried. I'm going to be the biggest wave in the sea. The older wave smiled. That's wonderful. But aren't you scared of disappearing? The young one asked. She shook softly. I used to be, but then I learned that falling isn't the end. It's just the ocean remembering itself. The young wave frowned. I don't understand. You will, she said gently. When the wind calms and you listen close enough to hear your own depth. That night, as the moon rose, silver and still, she felt the entire sea breathe with her. Every ripple, every shimmer, every quiet motion, connected. She realized there had never been many waves, only one ocean, endlessly changing shape. And in that realization, she found peace deeper than any crest or climb. Years later, though years meant little to water, the wave washed upon the shore. For a moment, she thought, this is it, I will vanish. But as the tide rolled back, she felt herself returning, not as the same wave, but as part of everything. The sand, the sky, the mist, all of it her, all of it one. She understood then that to let go is not to lose yourself, but to find the part of you that was never lost. In Buddhism, they call this truth anatta, the understanding that there is no permanent I. We are processes, not possessions. We arise, we change, we dissolve. But the essence, the awareness beneath it all, remains untouched. The wave and the ocean were never two things, only two ways of seeing. And maybe we're the same. We spend our lives defining ourselves, our careers, our titles, our faces, our fears, forgetting that every form is temporary. We cling to the crest, terrified of the fall, never realizing the fall is the way home. The wave once thought she needed to be extraordinary to matter. Now she knew she was never meant to stand out. She was meant to belong to the ocean of existence, to belong to the endless breath of life that connects everything. The wind, the sky, the laughter of a stranger, the heartbeat of someone you love. And maybe that's what awakening really is. Not becoming something more, but remembering you were never separate. As dawn touched the sea again, the wave smiled, though she had no face. She whispered to the wind, "Thank you for lifting me. Thank you for letting me fall." And the wind replied, "Thank you for dancing." That morning, a fisherman sitting quietly in his boat looked down at the calm water and saw his own reflection ripple. He smiled without knowing why. Perhaps because, for one brief second, the water and the watcher felt the same. We are all waves, moving through the vast ocean of life. We rise, we fall, we crash, we calm, and yet, beneath every motion, there is something still. The ocean of awareness that holds us all. When we forget this, we suffer. When we remember, we return. The wave remembered it was water, and in doing so, it found freedom not in rising higher, but in belonging deeper. But for some of us, awakening doesn't come through surrender. It comes through rhythm, through the music of ordinary moments that teach us to listen. If the ocean's wisdom was silence, the next story reveals the wisdom of sound. A reminder that life, like music, is beautiful not because it lasts, but because it ends. The music of existence. Miles had been playing piano since he was 6. He remembered sitting beside his grandmother, her wrinkled hands guiding his tiny fingers across the keys. She never told him which notes to play. She told him to listen. Music, she would say, isn't about the sound. It's about the space between sounds. As a child, he thought that was nonsense. But as an adult, he realized it was everything. By 40, Miles was a celebrated concert pianist. He'd performed in symphony halls across the country, under golden lights and heavy curtains. Audiences rose to their feet when he finished. Critics called his performances flawless. Yet the more applause he received, the more hollow it all began to sound. After every standing ovation came the same thought. What next? He had mastered every piece, every technical detail, but somewhere along the way, the music had become mechanical. A series of perfect notes played perfectly, but without life. He played for admiration, not for meaning. The silence between notes, the breath of the song, had disappeared. One evening, after a concert in New York, he stayed behind after the audience left. The theater was dark except for a single bulb above the piano. He sat down again, pressed a key, and listened to the note fade. The sound echoed softly, then dissolved into quiet. He closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he didn't play another note. He just listened, The silence seemed alive, deep, patient, ancient. And in that stillness, he heard something faint, the rhythm of his own heartbeat. It pulsed softly, like a hidden metronome reminding him that music didn't live in performance halls. It lived inside him. The next morning, he took a walk through Central Park. It was early spring. The air smelled like new beginnings. He passed street performers, a saxophone player, a cellist, a drummer tapping on overturned buckets. None of them played perfectly, but their joy was unmistakable. Their music wasn't flawless, but it breathed. He stopped beside an old man playing violin under a bridge. The bow was worn, the strings squeaked occasionally, but the melody was heartbreakingly beautiful. Miles listened for a long time. When the song ended, he asked, "How do you play with such feeling?" The old man smiled. "I don't play the music," he said. "The music plays me." Miles frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" The violinist chuckled. "You can't control sound any more than you can control life. You just shape it for a while, then let it go." He tapped the violin gently. "Every note dies the moment it's born. That's why it's precious." Those words followed Miles for days. Every note dies the moment it's born. He thought about how in Buddhism there is a truth called anicca, impermanence. Everything arises and fades like the sound of a single note. To cling to permanence is to suffer. To accept impermanence is to live. He realized he had been clinging, not to music, but to identity. He wanted to be the pianist, the master, the flawless performer. He had forgotten the simple joy of being a listener in the orchestra of existence. A week later, he visited a small music school outside the city where his grandmother had once taught. The students were young, messy, full of mistakes. Their notes tumbled over each other like laughter. It was chaos, and it was beautiful. As he listened, he felt something loosen in his chest. Their imperfections were like fingerprints of life, proof that music wasn't meant to be polished, it was meant to be felt. That night, Miles sat at his own piano in the quiet of his apartment. He lit a single candle and placed an old photo of his grandmother nearby. He didn't open any sheet music. He just placed his hands on the keys and waited. A melody came, slow, uneven, honest. Each note rose and fell like a breath. He didn't try to correct it. He let it be what it wanted to be. Fleeting, imperfect, true. As he played, he began to cry. Not from sadness, but from remembering. He realized he had never lost the music. He had only stopped listening to it. And in that small room, surrounded by shadows and candlelight, he felt as if the universe itself was exhaling through him, as though the piano wasn't an instrument, but a doorway. When the last note faded, he whispered to the silence, "Thank you." It wasn't a prayer, but it felt like one. He understood then what his grandmother meant all those years ago. That music wasn't about sound at all. It was about awareness, about noticing the rise and fall, the birth and death of every tone, every breath, every heartbeat, because life, too, is a song, and none of its notes are meant to last. In the weeks that followed, Miles began to play differently. He still performed, but now he began each concert with a bow, not to the audience, but to the silence. He allowed pauses, imperfections, and the occasional mistake. The critics noticed the change. They called it human, tender, unpredictably spiritual. One reviewer wrote, "It's as if Miles no longer plays the piano. He prays with it." He smiled when he read that. Maybe, he thought, prayer was just another word for presence. One afternoon, after a rehearsal, a student approached him. "Maestro," the boy said shyly, "how do you stay so calm when you make mistakes?" Miles smiled. "Because they're supposed to happen," the boy frowned. "But mistakes ruin the song." Miles shook his head. "No, mistakes reveal the song. They remind you that the music is alive." He placed his hand on the piano lid. Every note, every silence, every heartbeat, it's all part of the same symphony. The trick is not to control it, but to join it. That evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, Miles sat by his window, listening to the hum of life outside. Car horns, footsteps, laughter, the faint sound of rain beginning to fall. It was all music, unplanned, unrehearsed, perfectly imperfect. He closed his eyes and smiled. The entire world was playing, and for once, he wasn't just the performer. He was part of the orchestra. In Buddhism, there is a teaching. Life is not a problem to be solved, but a song to be sung. You don't have to hit every note. You just have to be present enough to feel them. Miles finally understood that the end of every melody is not a loss, but a return to silence. And silence, he realized, is the music that never stops playing. Later that year, at his final concert before retirement, he walked onto the stage, looked out at the audience, and said only this: "Every song I've ever played has already ended, but the music of life, the one you make when you listen, that one never fades." He sat, closed his eyes, and began his last performance. A simple tune, just a few notes. And when the final sound dissolved into stillness, he smiled, knowing it didn't end. It just became part of everything. Miles learned that every melody, like every life, exists only for a moment. And that's what makes it beautiful. But not everyone finds peace through music. Some find it in the earth, in their work, their roots, their patience, and others in the humble rhythm of tending, planting, and letting go. If Miles heard the truth through sound, the next story is about a man who learned it through silence, in the quiet language of soil and surrender. The farmer and the flowing river. In a quiet valley surrounded by mountains and mist, there lived an old farmer named Thomas. His hands were calloused, his back bent, but his eyes still held the calm of a man who had seen many seasons. He had inherited a small piece of land and a narrow river that ran through it, a river that both gave and took in equal measure. Every spring, it brought life, rich soil, fresh water, and the promise of green fields. And every autumn, it took some of that life away, flooding the edges, washing away fences, carrying bits of the harvest downstream. Thomas had spent most of his years trying to control it. He built barriers of stone, dug deeper trenches, shouted at the clouds when the rain was too much. He believed peace would come only when the river finally obeyed him. But rivers don't obey, they flow. One summer, after a long drought, Thomas's crops began to wither. The ground cracked, the leaves curled, and the air shimmered with heat. He stood by the river, now reduced to a trickle, and clenched his fists. "Why can't you ever give me what I need?" he shouted. The water whispered softly against the rocks, indifferent, For weeks he waited for rain that never came. Every morning he walked the dry fields, muttering to himself. He felt betrayed by the river, by the weather, by life itself. One evening, as the sun burned red behind the hills, he saw something glinting in the distance. A group of monks were walking barefoot along the riverbank, their robes fluttering like saffron flags in the breeze. They were travelers from a monastery beyond the mountains. Thomas, desperate for answers, called out, "Can you make the rain return?" The eldest monk smiled gently. "No one can make the rain return," he said, "but you can learn how to wait for it without drowning in worry." Thomas frowned. "Waiting doesn't water crops." "No," said the monk, "but neither does anger." Then he pointed at the river. "Do you see how it bends around every stone? It doesn't fight, and yet it always finds its way." Before Thomas could reply, the monks continued their journey, disappearing down the dusty path. But their words lingered, soft, unsettling, true. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He sat outside under a sky filled with stars, listening to the faint murmur of the river. The water seemed to whisper something ancient, something he'd never heard before because he was always shouting over it. He closed his eyes and tried to breathe with it. In with the flow, out with the release. For the first time, he didn't wish the river to be different. He just let it be. Days passed. Still no rain, but something within him began to shift. He started to wake up early, not to complain, but to listen. He noticed how the morning mist rose from the ground like prayer smoke, how the light shimmered on the thin silver thread of water, how life continued quietly, even when nothing went his way. He began repairing the fences, not out of frustration but care. He tended the few green plants that remained, watering them gently with what little he had. And as he worked, he felt something unfamiliar. Peace, even without control. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered above the valley. Within hours, rain began to fall. Soft at first, then heavy, pounding against the earth. Thomas ran outside, laughing like a child. The river swelled again, alive, strong. But soon, his laughter turned to fear as the water rose higher, faster than he expected, flooding his garden, breaking his fences, swallowing his fields. He tried to stop it. He threw stones into the current, shouted for it to slow, but the river roared louder, unstoppable. By nightfall, everything he had built was underwater. Exhausted, soaked, defeated, Thomas sat on a rock and buried his face in his hands. The river had given again, and taken again. At dawn, the rain stopped. Steam rose from the wet earth like breath. Thomas walked through the ruin of his field. Mud, debris, broken tools. It was hard not to feel the weight of loss. Then, near the riverbank, he noticed something gleaming beneath the surface. Smooth pebbles, shining like coins under the new sun. He waded in and picked one up. It was perfectly round, shaped by years of movement, softened by surrender. And suddenly, he understood. Everything the river touched, it shaped, not through force, through patience. He looked around and saw that the flood had also brought new soil, rich and dark. His fences could be rebuilt, his crops replanted. Nothing was truly lost, only changed. The river hadn't been cruel. It had simply followed its nature. He was the one who had been fighting it all along. In that moment, he remembered the monk's words. The river doesn't fight, and yet it always finds its way. That evening, Thomas built a small bench by the riverbank. Every sunset, he would sit there quietly, watching the water move. He no longer tried to predict its flow or command its pace. He simply observed the sound, the shimmer, the rhythm of something greater than himself. He began to understand the Buddhist teaching of karma, that our suffering often comes not from life itself, but from how tightly we hold on to what we want life to be. The river didn't punish, it responded. When he grasped too hard, it took. When he opened his hands, it gave. And so he learned to plant with effort, but harvest with acceptance, to work with care, but let go of the outcome, to love the flow more than the fence. Years later, younger farmers from nearby villages came to him for advice. "How do you keep your land so peaceful?" one asked. Thomas smiled and pointed to the river. "I stopped trying to make it mine," he said. "I just take care of what passes through." One day, as the sun set behind the mountains, he saw a group of children playing by the water. They were building little boats from leaves and sticks, sending them downstream, laughing as they floated away. "Don't they know those boats will sink?" his neighbor said. Thomas smiled. "They do. That's why they're laughing." He watched as the river carried each fragile boat gently away. He felt gratitude, not for what he owned, but for what he had learned to release. He whispered to the water, "Thank you for teaching me what no storm ever could." That control is just another kind of fear, and letting go is the only real strength. That night, as the moonlight danced across the surface of the river, Thomas finally felt what he had spent a lifetime searching for: peace without guarantees, the kind that doesn't depend on weather, harvest, or outcome, the kind that flows. He understood then that the river was never outside him. It was inside, running through his thoughts, his breath, his heart, and by learning to flow with it, he had learned to live. In Buddhism, there's a saying, "You cannot step into the same river twice, for both you and the river are constantly changing." Thomas smiled as he watched the water pass. Not the same river, not the same man, and yet both still alive in each other's movement. He closed his eyes, took a slow breath, and felt the quiet truth ripple through him. To flow is to be free. Thomas learned that peace isn't found in control, but in harmony with what moves beyond our grasp. Yet, not everyone must learn through rivers or storms. Some lessons arrive in the smallest, most unexpected moments, like a simple smile that can change the course of an entire day. If the farmer's wisdom was found in the rhythm of water, the next story reveals the gentle power of kindness, the quiet miracle of giving light to the world, even when the world forgets to shine back. The smile before the world smiles back. Maya worked at a small coffee shop on the corner of a busy street in Portland. Every morning, she stood behind the counter, serving espresso and warmth to strangers rushing to be somewhere else. She loved the smell of roasted beans, the hum of soft jazz in the background, and the tiny moments of kindness that slipped between transactions. But lately, those moments had been rare. The world outside seemed angrier. People barked orders without eye contact. Phones buzzed louder than voices, and Maya, once cheerful and kind, began to feel invisible. Each day felt heavier, her smile thinner, her heart dimmer. She started to wonder if kindness even mattered anymore. Why keep giving warmth to a world that had grown so cold? One rainy Thursday morning, a man came in, soaked, impatient, already irritated before he reached the counter. He slammed his card on the table and said, "Just a black coffee, large, and make it quick." Maya felt something in her chest tighten. She wanted to match his tone, to remind him that she was human too. But instead she took a breath. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. When someone forgets to be kind, that's when they need it the most. So she smiled, not the forced, polite kind, but a soft, genuine one that said, "I see you." She handed him his coffee and simply said, "I hope the rest of your day gets better." The man paused, confused. He mumbled something, maybe a thank you, maybe not, and left. Maya didn't think much of it, but that single act, quiet as it was, began a ripple she couldn't yet see. The next morning, the same man returned. This time he wasn't rushing. He stood in line, patient, and when it was his turn, he said, "Medium coffee, please. And how are you today?" Maya blinked, surprised. "I'm good, thank you." He smiled just a little. "You told me yesterday you hoped my day would get better." It did, and that was all. But when he left, Maya noticed something different. Her chest felt lighter. She realized something powerful in that small exchange. Kindness doesn't always echo loudly, but it always travels, unseen, unstoppable, inevitable. That night, she walked home under the drizzle, her umbrella dotted with light from the street lamps. She thought about how every act, a smile, a word, a tone, sends ripples outward. In Buddhism, it's called karma, the law of cause and effect. But karma isn't punishment or reward, it's reflection. What we send out, we meet again. And the world, she realized, was not separate from her. It was a mirror. When she smiled, even into its storm, the storm softened. The next day, Maya decided to make a quiet experiment. She would smile at everyone, no matter what came back. Not as a strategy, but as a practice, a meditation in motion. At first, it felt awkward. Some people ignored her, some frowned, some looked startled, as if they'd forgotten what a stranger's smile looked like. But then, slowly, something started to shift. An elderly woman began to come in daily just to chat. A young mother with a crying baby relaxed when Maya handed her coffee with gentle eyes. Even her co-workers, worn out and cynical, began joking again, their laughter returning to the air like birds after a long winter. One afternoon, a teenage boy entered, his hoodie pulled low, his energy heavy. He ordered a small latte and fumbled with his coins, clearly short on cash. Maya smiled and said, "Don't worry about it. This one's on me." He looked up startled. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because someone once did the same for me." He nodded slowly. "Thanks," he whispered. "I really needed that." When he left, Maya noticed he had drawn a small heart on the napkin and written, "You made my day." She tucked it under the register. Her reminder that kindness, like coffee, warms best when shared fresh. Weeks passed, and Maya's coffee shop began to feel different. Not because of new decor or management, but because of energy. Subtle, alive, contagious. It wasn't perfection, it was presence. People lingered longer. Laughter felt easier, and for the first time in months, Maya didn't dread her alarm each morning. One evening, as she wiped down the counter before closing, she saw the same man from that rainy day return, holding an umbrella this time. He looked calmer, younger somehow. He smiled and handed her a small box. "What's this?" she asked. "Just a thank you." For that smile. Inside was a tiny silver charm in the shape of a sun. "I'd been having a rough time," he said. "That day you smiled at me, I decided not to quit my job or myself. Sometimes people don't need saving. They just need reminding. Maya's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Thank you," he nodded. "No," he said softly. "Thank you." That night, Maya walked home in the rain again. The city glowed, reflections shimmering on the wet pavement. She held the silver sun in her hand and thought about how small gestures carry the weight of galaxies. In that moment, she realized every smile, every act of patience, every gentle word is a seed of awakening. We plant them without knowing where they'll grow, but they always do. The Buddha once taught that loving kindness, metta, is the wish for all beings to be happy, not someday, not conditionally, but now, in the middle of their chaos, their fear, their imperfection. And Maya understood. To practice kindness is to trust that every heart, no matter how closed, is still capable of opening. Months later, she became known in the neighborhood as the girl who smiles. People waved as they passed. Even strangers from across the street nodded in recognition. Her shop became a small refuge for anyone who needed a pause, a breath, a moment of human warmth. Sometimes customers would say, "You're always so positive." She'd laugh and reply, "Not always. I just try to remember what world I want to live in and start building it, one smile at a time." One morning, a co-worker asked, "Don't you ever get tired of being kind?" Maya thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she said. "But then I remember, even the sun must burn to shine." And as she poured a new cup of coffee, she felt gratitude for every hard day that had once made her doubt kindness, because without them, she might never have learned its power. In Buddhism, it's said that the mind is like a garden. Whatever you water grows. If you water anger, it blooms into pain. If you water kindness, it blossoms into peace, not only within you, but in everyone who crosses your path. Maya had become a gardener of small joys, and the world, once cold and grey, had started to bloom again. Quietly, beautifully, inevitably. That evening, as the shop closed and the last customer left, Maya stood by the window watching the city lights flicker like candles in the distance. She saw her reflection faintly in the glass, smiling without trying, and she realized something profound. She no longer waited for the world to smile first. She smiled because it hadn't yet, because someone had to begin, and in that small, radiant act, the world smiled back. Maya's smile taught her that kindness is never wasted. It always finds its way back, like sunlight reflected in 1,000 mirrors. But sometimes, life asks us to express love not through words or gestures, but through creation, through art, craft, or the patient shaping of something fragile. If Maya's lesson was about giving light, the next story belongs to someone who learned the art of surrender through clay, fire, and stillness, a quiet dance between control and release. The Potter's Hands. In a small village by the edge of a quiet desert, there lived a potter named Samuel. Every morning, before the sun rose, he would light the kiln behind his house and begin shaping clay. His neighbors said his hands could breathe life into earth. Each pot, each vase, each bowl carried a soul of its own. Balanced, graceful, somehow alive. He sold them in the market, but for Samuel, the art was never about money. It was meditation. It was prayer in motion. He believed that perfection came from mastery, from decades of repetition and discipline. He had learned from his father, who had learned from his father before him. To Samuel, his hands were his teachers, and the clay was his mirror. But lately, something had changed. His hands trembled slightly with age. Sometimes the clay would slip, the shape would collapse, the symmetry would fail, and each time it did, frustration filled him. He would smash the ruined piece back into a lump, angry at himself, angry at the clay, angry at imperfection. He began to doubt. "Maybe my time is over," he said to the empty workshop. The silence offered no answer, only the smell of burned earth and the faint hiss of cooling ash. One morning, a young woman came to his shop. She was a traveler, her clothes dusty, her eyes curious. She watched him work quietly for a while, then asked, "Do you ever get tired of shaping the same thing every day?" Samuel smiled faintly. "No two pots are ever the same. But you destroy so many," she said gently. "Why not keep the imperfect ones?" He shook his head. "Because they're not good enough." The woman picked up a cracked bowl from a corner shelf. It had a small fracture running down its side, a thin scar from the kiln. "It's beautiful," she said. "It looks human," Samuel frowned. "It's flawed." "Maybe," she replied, "but maybe that's why it speaks." That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He sat by the dying fire, turning a piece of clay in his hands. The girl's words echoed softly. "It looks human." He stared at his fingers, wrinkled, scarred, steady yet fragile. He realized he had spent a lifetime trying to make the clay perfect, never noticing that his own hands weren't. And yet, it was through their imperfection that beauty was born. The next morning, he decided to try something different. Instead of fighting the clay, he followed it. He pressed softly, letting it tell him where it wanted to go. When the rim bent, he didn't fix it. When it cracked slightly, he didn't hide it. He just breathed in, out, and continued shaping. Hours passed like moments. When he finished, he stepped back. The pot wasn't perfect, but it was alive, organic, asymmetrical, free. He smiled for the first time in weeks. That evening, as the sun painted gold across the desert, the traveler returned. He showed her the new pot. "What do you think?" he asked. She studied it quietly, then smiled. "It looks like it made itself," Samuel laughed. "Maybe it did," she nodded. "That's how the best things are born, when we stop trying to own them." After she left, Samuel sat in silence, feeling the weight of those words. He realized how tightly he had been gripping life, his art, his reputation, even his idea of who he was. He had mistaken control for care. But creation, he now saw, wasn't about control. It was about participation, about joining the dance between form and emptiness, between holding and letting go. He thought of the Buddhist teaching his father once quoted, "We shape the clay into a pot, but it's the emptiness inside that makes it useful." He finally understood. Days turned into weeks. Samuel began teaching children from the village, letting them play with the clay however they wished. He no longer corrected their mistakes. He just guided their breathing. "Don't force it," he would say softly. "Feel where it wants to go. Let your hands listen." Some days the pots collapsed. Other days they came out oddly shaped, uneven, strange. But the children laughed, and somehow every piece felt alive with their joy. And Samuel noticed something miraculous. His own hands had stopped trembling, not because they were younger, but because they were no longer afraid. One afternoon, while cleaning his shelves, he found the old cracked bowl the traveler had once held. He decided not to throw it away. Instead, he filled the crack with melted gold, a practice he'd once seen in a book called Kintsugi, the art of repairing with grace. When the gold cooled, the bowl gleamed softly, its imperfection transformed into beauty. He placed it on the center of his table, a reminder that every break is a chance for light to enter. As the years passed, Samuel's workshop became known not for flawless pottery, but for pieces that felt alive. Travelers came from far away to buy them, not because they were perfect, but because they carried peace. Each pot seemed to whisper a truth. You don't need to be whole to be worthy. You just need to be real. One evening, after finishing his last firing of the day, Samuel sat outside under the stars. The desert air was cool, the sky endless. He held a small piece of clay in his palm and rolled it gently between his fingers. He realized that the clay had never once resisted him. It had only mirrored the tension in his own hands. And maybe life was the same. When we grip too tightly, things crack. When we soften, everything finds its shape. He whispered to the night, "Thank you for teaching me to stop trying to mold life and to let life mold me." In the stillness, he imagined his father's voice, calm and kind. "Remember, son, we are all both the pot and the potter, formed and forming at once." Samuel smiled. He looked at his hands, the lines, the scars, the gold dust from the kiln. For the first time, he didn't see tools. He saw a prayer, one that said, "I am enough as I am." In Buddhism, this is called non-attachment, the wisdom of doing with love, but without clinging to the result. Samuel had spent a lifetime shaping clay, and in the end, the clay had shaped him. He finally understood that letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means giving space for beauty, for peace, for life to breathe on its own. That night, before closing his eyes, he placed his hands together, not in exhaustion, but in gratitude. They were the same hands that had broken, healed, trembled, and created. And now they rested, still, gentle, at peace. The potter's hands learned that to create is to surrender, to touch life lightly enough for it to bloom on its own. But while Samuel found freedom through stillness, another soul would learn the same lesson through motion, through laughter, rhythm, and the quiet art of belonging. If the potter's wisdom was shaped by clay, the next story is carried by connection, a reminder that we don't smile because the world is kind. We smile and the world becomes kind. The music of compassion in a city that never truly slept, where car horns replaced birdsong and people hurried past each other like pages in a book no one finished reading. There lived a street musician named Aaron. He wasn't famous or rich or even noticed most days. He played his old wooden guitar near the subway entrance, his open case filled with coins, gum wrappers, and the occasional folded note that said, "Thank you." Aaron didn't play for money. He played to stay alive, not physically, but spiritually. Music was his breath, his prayer, his way of remembering that beauty could still exist in a world moving too fast to hear it. One cold evening, as the first snow began to fall, Aaron sat beneath the flickering light of a street lamp. His fingers were numb, his voice cracked, but he sang anyway. It was a song his mother used to hum when life was hard. A lullaby with no words, only warmth. Most people passed without looking, but a young woman stopped. Her eyes were tired, her scarf too thin for the winter air. She stood there quietly, listening. When he finished, she smiled faintly and dropped a folded bill into his case. "Thank you," she whispered. "I needed that." Aaron nodded. "So did I." Later that night, as he packed his guitar, he noticed the note she had left with the bill. It read, "You reminded me I'm still here." He stared at the words for a long time. They were small, but they filled him with warmth that no coat could give. He realized that music, like kindness, doesn't end when the sound fades. It travels quietly into someone's life and becomes something new. Over the next weeks, more people began to stop. A child danced while his mother laughed. An old man sat beside Aaron and hummed along. Even the police officer who once told him to move smiled and said, "Play one more." The street began to change. Not the buildings, not the noise, but the energy. Something softer was spreading, like invisible music under the city's restless heartbeat. Aaron didn't know it then, but every note he played was a small act of compassion, and compassion, like sound, vibrates far beyond where it begins. One afternoon, a boy approached him holding a harmonica. He was maybe 10, shy, uncertain. "My dad says I shouldn't waste time on music," the boy said quietly. "But I want to learn. Can you teach me?" Aaron smiled. Of course. Every Saturday, the boy returned. They sat by the subway entrance, two musicians in two worlds, one seasoned, one just beginning. They practiced simple songs, laughing when mistakes turned into unexpected beauty. After a few months, the boy could play, not perfectly, but with heart. On their last day together, the boy said, "When I play, I feel like I'm part of something big, like I disappear, but in a good way." Aaron smiled. That's because music is what happens when you stop being separate. That night, Aaron went home and thought about what the boy had said. When you stop being separate, he realized compassion was the same way. It's the music that plays when we stop hearing only our own song. He remembered something from a Buddhist book he once found at a thrift store. When one heart awakens, all hearts move a little closer to light. Maybe that was true. Maybe every note, every smile, every act of care was part of the same invisible symphony, the music of compassion. Winter deepened. One snowy morning, Aaron noticed a small crowd gathered where he usually played. At the center was a young woman kneeling beside an old homeless man, wrapping a blanket around him. She was humming softly, a tune Aaron recognized. It was his mother's lullaby. He stood still, tears rising behind his eyes. The melody had traveled from his heart to hers to another. It had become something he no longer owned, and that was the beauty of it. A week later, Aaron decided to play inside the hospital across the street. He asked the staff if he could sit by the waiting room. They agreed. Every evening, he played for whoever was there. People waiting for news, holding fear, holding hope. Some nights, he played for no one, but the air itself seemed to listen. Nurses would pause for a breath of calm. Patients smiled weakly as they passed. Parents rocked their children to the rhythm of his gentle chords. And one night, a doctor stopped beside him and said, "I don't know your name, but your music has saved more hearts here than medicine ever could." Aaron smiled, bowed slightly, and whispered, I just remind them what's already inside. He continued playing every evening, not for applause, but as meditation, a practice of giving sound to silence. He learned that compassion isn't grand or dramatic. It's the quiet willingness to show up again and again, even when no one says thank you, because sometimes what people remember isn't the song itself, but the presence that played it. One spring morning, after many years, Aaron's guitar strings finally broke mid-song. He laughed softly and laid it across his knees. The sound lingered in the air, fading into something beyond hearing. A silence that wasn't empty, but full. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, felt the entire city breathing with him. The traffic, the footsteps, the laughter, the pain, all of it, music. In Buddhism, it's said that compassion is the vibration of the awakened heart, a soundless music that plays wherever love meets suffering. Aaron realized he didn't need his guitar to keep playing. Every breath, every kind act, every moment of awareness was a note in that endless melody. And as long as there was one heart willing to listen, the song would never end. That night, before going to sleep, he wrote a few words in his notebook. The world is a choir, not a competition. Every kindness is an instrument. Every heart that heals makes the music brighter. He placed the notebook on his windowsill and looked out at the city lights below, each one flickering like a note in the grand score of existence. He smiled. The symphony of compassion was still playing, and he was grateful to be part of it. Aaron's music reminds us that compassion isn't something we perform, it's something we become. It flows through us, connecting heart to heart, until there's no longer a giver or a receiver, only the song. And yet, even compassion has its final verse, a place beyond effort, beyond doing, where love and peace no longer need expression, because they are the silence itself. If Aaron's story was about sound, the next one will be about stillness, the final rest note of every life well lived. The silence that remembers. There is a silence that lives beneath all sounds. Not the silence of nothingness, but the silence that holds everything. It waits behind every note, every breath, every heartbeat, like the sky that stays even as clouds drift by. And that silence, patient, unchanging, remembers you. Somewhere, in a small cabin beside a lake that caught the morning light like glass, an old woman named Grace sat wrapped in a shawl, watching the mist lift from the water. The world was quiet. Even the birds hadn't begun to sing. She could hear the small creak of wood, the slow rhythm of her own breathing, and beneath it all, a soundless hum, as if life itself were meditating. Grace had lived many seasons. She had known joy that filled her lungs and grief that hollowed her to silence. She had tried, failed, learned, lost, and loved again. And through it all, she carried a question that had followed her entire life. What remains when everything else is gone? When youth faded? When names were forgotten? When the people she loved drifted back into the great beyond? What still stayed? For years, she thought the answer was memory. But now, in this stillness, she realized it was something deeper. Memory fades. Presence doesn't. Presence remembers. She poured tea into her cracked cup, the same one she had used for 40 years. Once, she would have replaced it. Now, she traced the golden crack with her thumb and smiled. The imperfection no longer felt broken, it felt alive. Through it, the warmth reached her fingers more tenderly. The steam rose, and in it she saw faces. Aiden pausing to breathe, Sofia finally resting in her unfinished room, Eli smiling at his reflection, the farmer listening to the river, the potter shaping stillness into form, Maya offering her quiet smile to the world, and the musician whose final note became compassion itself. Each of them was a story, each story a mirror, and now she could see that they were never separate. They were fragments of one great awakening, different hearts, one silence moving through them all. She set her cup down and walked to the lake. The water reflected the pale sky, trembling with soft light. A single leaf floated by, spinning lazily, then settled into stillness at the center. Grace whispered, "So this is how life lets go, not with resistance, but with rhythm." She thought about how she had once clung to certainty, to plans, to people, to the idea of herself. She had fought the flow, built walls against change, believing peace meant control. But the years had softened her. She had watched enough dawns to know that the sky never holds on to night. And now she could finally say thank you to the impermanence that had taught her what truly lasts. When the evening came, she sat again by the fire. The flames flickered and cracked, each spark a tiny birth and death. She felt no sorrow in their ending. Everything burns only to become light again. She closed her eyes and began to breathe slowly, in through the nose, out through the heart. Each breath, a wave returning home. Each exhale, a soft surrender. And somewhere between inhale and exhale, she felt the boundary of her body blur. The air outside became the air inside. The fire became warmth in her chest. The world was no longer something she observed. It was something she was. Images flowed through her mind. The clock that stopped so Aiden could begin again. The river that taught Thomas to yield. The laughter of Maya behind her counter. The gold crack running through the potter's bowl. Every story, every lesson, every tear had been leading to this one moment of stillness. And she understood. Letting go was never about losing. It was about returning to the silence that remembers. Outside, the night deepened. The stars appeared one by one, as if the universe itself were breathing her name back into being. She smiled. "All this time," she whispered, "I thought I was learning to let go, but really I was learning to stay present, stay open, stay in love with the moment that asks for nothing but awareness." Her hands rested on her heart. It beat softly, like a drum guiding her back to the center. In that rhythm, she could feel every life she'd ever touched. Each one still pulsing through her, threads of kindness woven into eternity. The silence around her was no longer empty. It was full of memory, of music, of compassion, of everything she had once called mine and now called us. In Buddhism, there's a teaching: when the mind is silent, it remembers its true nature. Grace understood. The silence does not erase, it gathers. It holds the stories gently, like the ocean holding the waves after their last fall. She looked out at the lake one final time. The surface had gone completely still. No ripples, no wind, only reflection. Sky within water, water within sky. And as she gazed, she no longer knew where one ended and the other began. She closed her eyes. Her breath slowed, then became the wind moving through the pines. the ripple beneath the stars, the hush between the world's heartbeats. There was no longer grace, only the silence that remembers, the silence that remembers every story, every soul, every moment that ever dared to love and let go. And tonight, that silence remembers you too. So rest now. Let the world breathe itself through you. You are not separate from the peace you seek. You are the stillness watching itself unfold. In the hush between this breath and the next, may you feel what Grace felt, the quiet joy of belonging to everything, and the gentle truth that nothing is ever lost. The silence holds it all. The silence holds you, and it remembers. The bridge between moments. There are two kinds of time in this world. The one we measure with clocks, hours, days, years, and the one that lives quietly between them. Those brief, fragile bridges where everything changes, but nothing seems to move. That is where life truly happens, and that is where the story of Daniel begins. Daniel was an architect, a man who built things that lasted. Bridges, towers, symmetry in steel. His hands drew clean lines. His mind saw structure where others saw chaos. He believed in stability, that peace was built, not found. But one evening, that belief cracked. He had just finished inspecting a bridge on the outskirts of the city, a project that had consumed 3 years of his life. As he walked across it for the first time alone, a faint tremor rose from deep within the metal. The wind sang through the cables, a low, haunting hum. It wasn't danger, it was music. And for a moment, Daniel stopped walking. He stood at the center of his own creation, a perfect balance of tension and release, and felt something he couldn't name. The bridge seemed alive, breathing with the wind, shifting imperceptibly with the earth below. It was strong, yet it moved, and he thought, maybe strength isn't what doesn't move. Maybe it's what moves gracefully. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake replaying that sound, the hum of the cables, the whisper of air passing through steel. He realized that everything he had built was held together not by rigidity, but by flexibility. The bridge survived not because it resisted the wind, but because it danced with it. He rose from bed, opened the window, and let the night air in. Outside, the city glowed, tiny constellations of human stories, each one suspended between moments. The next morning, Daniel visited his father in the countryside. His father had grown old, his hands slow, his steps careful. They sat by the porch in silence for a while, watching the river flow beneath the old wooden bridge near the house. His father said, "You used to play there when you were little. Do you remember?" Daniel nodded. "I built bridges out of sticks back then," his father chuckled. "And they always fell apart because I didn't tie them right." "No," his father said softly, "because you kept testing them before they were ready." Daniel smiled. "Maybe I still do that." His father looked at him, eyes kind. "Sometimes we hurry to cross what life is still building." The words stayed with him. He realized he had spent his whole life racing from one goal to another, always crossing, never resting on the bridge between. He had mastered construction, but forgotten the beauty of transition. That night, he walked out to the wooden bridge by the river. The boards creaked under his weight. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the water. He leaned against the railing and looked down. The reflection of the moon trembled in the current, whole, then shattered, then whole again. He whispered, "So this is life." A perfect circle of breaking and returning. For the next few months, Daniel changed. He began to notice the spaces in everything, the pause before he spoke, the silence between two notes of music, the breath before a new day began. He realized that peace doesn't live in what we build. It lives in what we allow. He started meditating each morning, something his younger self would have dismissed as unproductive. He would sit quietly, listening to the faint hum of traffic, the wind brushing the curtains, his own heart syncing with the rhythm of the world. And he learned something profound, that between every inhale and exhale, there is a bridge. And when you walk across it with awareness, you touch eternity. One afternoon, a young intern at his firm asked him, "Sir, how do you design something that lasts forever?" Daniel smiled gently. "Nothing lasts forever," he said, "but if you build with love and allow space for movement, it will live long enough to carry meaning." He saw the confusion in the intern's face and added, "A bridge isn't strong because it stands still. It's strong because it knows how to bend." The intern nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but somehow feeling the truth of it. That evening, Daniel visited the bridge he had built again. He walked to the center as the sun began to set. The wind moved through the cables, and once again the structure sang. He closed his eyes and listened. Each vibration was a memory of effort, failure, correction, patience, surrender. He realized he was standing not on a piece of engineering, but on a metaphor of his own becoming. He thought of the people he had met, his father's patience, his mother's quiet faith, his colleagues' laughter, the faces of strangers he had brushed past in hallways and airports. Every connection had been a bridge, every goodbye a crossing, and suddenly he felt gratitude for the countless bridges that had carried him here. Not just the ones of stone and steel, but the invisible ones made of love, forgiveness, and time. He leaned on the railing and whispered, "If everything is a bridge, maybe even dying is just another crossing." The wind moved gently, as if answering, and he smiled, not out of certainty, but trust. He no longer needed to know what waited on the other side. It was enough to feel the bridge beneath his feet. In Buddhism, there's a saying, "When you let go of this shore and the next, you rest in the middle." And that is enlightenment. Daniel finally understood. He didn't need to cling to the past or reach for the future. He could stand here in the middle of becoming and call it peace. As night descended, the city lights flickered like fireflies along the horizon. Daniel stood quietly, his reflection merging with the bridge, his breath merging with the wind. He thought, maybe the universe is one endless bridge, built moment by moment, for us to walk across together. And with that thought, he closed his eyes, listening to the hum of existence between one heartbeat and the next. The bridge held him, the moment held him, and he was home. Daniel learned that life isn't a race from shore to shore. It's the art of walking the bridge with grace. And sometimes, when we finally stop hurrying to arrive, we discover that peace was waiting halfway all along. If Daniel found serenity through stillness, the next story belongs to a man who learned it through light. A quiet craftsman who built lanterns not to push back the dark, but to understand it. The Lantern Maker. In a quiet village nestled between the mountains and the sea, there lived a lantern maker named Hero. Every evening, when the sun dipped behind the hills, his small workshop glowed like a gentle sunrise. Warm, golden, alive. People said his lanterns were different. They didn't just light a room, they seemed to calm it. Children stopped crying when their parents hung one above the window. Old couples smiled as the soft glow brushed across their wrinkles. When asked his secret, Hero always smiled and said, "It's not the paper or the flame, it's the silence between them." Hero had learned his craft from his grandfather, a quiet man who believed that every lantern held a soul. "When you light it," he had said, "you are not chasing away darkness. You are inviting it to dance." As a boy, Hero didn't understand. He thought light was meant to win, to push shadows into corners, to prove its strength. So he worked hard to make his lanterns brighter, hotter, longer lasting. He mixed oils and crafted wicks that burned like small suns. People loved them for a while. But one summer, a fire broke out in the village. The flames leapt from lantern to curtain, from curtain to roof. By dawn, half the street had turned to ash, and Hero's lantern, the brightest one, had started it. He stood before the ruins of his shop, the smell of smoke still clinging to the air, and whispered, "Light is not always kind." For months, he couldn't bring himself to make another lantern. He wandered the charred streets, helping his neighbors rebuild what his pride had destroyed. He saw how people worked together, sharing food, stories, silence, and slowly, he began to see that true light wasn't in fire, it was in hearts. One night, unable to sleep, he walked to the riverbank, where the reflection of the moon shimmered softly. There, an old monk was sitting, meditating by the water. Hero bowed respectfully and sat beside him. After a long silence, he asked, "Master, how do I bring back light without causing harm?" The monk opened his eyes, gazing at the moon's reflection rippling on the river. "Tell me," the monk said, "is the moon afraid of the dark?" Hero frowned. "No, it shines because of it," the monk smiled. "Exactly. Darkness is not the enemy. It is the canvas." Those words struck something deep within him. For years, he had made light that fought the dark. Now, he wanted to make light that listened to it. He rebuilt his workshop. Smaller, humbler. He replaced oil with beeswax, flame with ember, fire with breath. Each lantern he made after that was built with mindfulness. Thin layers of paper painted by hand, the edges left imperfect so the light could breathe. And when he lit them, the glow was softer, not a command, but a whisper. The villagers noticed. "This light feels peaceful," one woman said. "It doesn't chase the shadows, it rests with them." Word spread, and soon, people from nearby towns came to buy his lanterns, not for brightness, but for calm. Hero began inscribing small verses inside each lantern, so that when the light shone through, the words appeared faintly on the wall. One read, "You are the flame. You are also the night that allows it to be seen." Years passed. One winter evening, a young apprentice joined his workshop. A curious boy named Sora. He asked endless questions. Why do we use thin paper? Why do you leave the seams visible? Why do you blow gently before lighting the wick? Hero would smile and answer, "So the light remembers where it came from." Sora frowned. "Where did it come from?" "The same place you did," Hero said softly. Stillness. One day, a storm hit the village, fierce, unrelenting. Winds tore through the streets, and rain flooded the riverbanks. As lightning struck, several houses lost their roofs. When the storm passed, the villagers found their homes soaked, their lanterns ruined. Hero's workshop too had been damaged. Sora sat among the broken frames, despairing. "All your work, gone." Hero knelt beside him, holding a piece of torn paper. The candlelight flickered across its wet surface, revealing faint traces of the verse written inside. "Not gone," Hero said. "Just changed." He looked at the boy and smiled. "You see, Sora, light doesn't belong to the lantern. It only passes through." They began to rebuild again, not just the lanterns, but the spirit of the town. People brought scraps of old paper, pieces of bamboo, fragments of memory. Together, they crafted 100 new lanterns. Each one bore the marks of many hands, uneven, imperfect, beautiful. When they were done, Hero invited the villagers to the river that night. As the moon rose, they lit the lanterns and set them gently afloat. The river carried them, hundreds of small lights drifting toward the sea. Children clapped, elders wept quietly. Hero simply watched, his reflection mingling with the golden trail across the water. He whispered, "Let the light go. It will find its way home." Sora asked, "Do you think the world will remember our lanterns?" Hero smiled. "The world doesn't need to remember them. The light remembers us." In Buddhism, there's a teaching. A lamp does not intend to shine. It simply burns. And through that, others see. Hero had lived his whole life thinking light was something to control, something to spread, something to guard. Now, he understood. Light was meant to be shared, not owned. And the gentlest light is the one that doesn't try to change the world, only to love it as it is. That night, as the last lantern disappeared into the horizon, Hero felt no sadness. The darkness returned soft and natural. He looked up at the stars, tiny lanterns of the universe, burning and vanishing, yet somehow eternal. He closed his eyes, and in that darkness, he saw something brighter than flame. The quiet awareness that all light, all hearts and all lives come from the same source. He smiled and whispered, "Thank you, darkness, for letting me shine." Hero learned that true light doesn't conquer the dark, it embraces it. That illumination isn't about brightness, but about balance. And sometimes, the purest glow is the one that teaches others to see gently, without trying to be seen. If Hiro's story was about light, the next one unfolds in the language of rain, where reflection itself becomes the teacher, and every drop carries the wisdom of return. The Monk and the Mirror of Rain. The monastery stood on the side of a mountain that seemed to breathe. In summer, it shimmered beneath sunlight. In winter, it disappeared into clouds. And when it rained, it became something else entirely. A world of silver reflections, where sky and earth traded places. It was here that a young monk named Tenzin lived. He had taken his vows at 20, seeking peace after years of inner storms. But even within the monastery's stillness, his heart often felt unsettled, like a pond rippled by unseen wind. One afternoon, After a long meditation, Tenzin approached the old master who tended the temple garden. The master was pruning a small bonsai tree, moving slowly, breathing with each cut. "Master," Tenzin said, bowing, "why does suffering still visit me here? I left everything behind. My past, my possessions, even my name. And yet pain still finds me." The master smiled faintly without looking up. He touched a small branch and said, "This tree, do you think it suffers when I trim it?" Tenzin hesitated. "Perhaps it does, but it must be necessary." The old monk nodded. "Exactly. Pain too can be pruning." That night it rained. Not the harsh kind of rain that demands attention, but the kind that whispers softly on the roof, each drop like a bell calling the mind to return. Tenzin sat by the window, watching rivulets form on the glass. The candle beside him flickered, light and shadow dancing together. He thought of the master's words. Pain can be pruning. He wondered, pruning what? The next morning, the rain had not stopped. It fell in thin, endless threads, turning the courtyard into a mirror. The world had flipped. Trees upside down, sky beneath his feet. Tenzin stepped outside, barefoot, the cold mud squeezed between his toes. For the first time in months, he didn't try to resist the discomfort. He simply walked. He stopped near the stone well in the garden, where rainwater had gathered into a perfect, trembling pool. He leaned over to look inside, and there he saw it. His reflection, distorted by the rain, shifting with every drop. When he frowned, the image blurred. When he breathed slowly, the reflection steadied. In that moment, he understood. The world was not making him suffer. He was simply seeing himself through moving water. He sat beside the well for a long time. Every sound became music. The dripping eaves, the wind through bamboo, the heartbeat of the rain itself. Each drop was a tiny sermon about impermanence. No drop fell twice. No reflection stayed still. And yet, the well remained, unchanged, unbothered, infinite. Later, he found the master again. "Master," he said quietly, "I think I understand a little. When I look at the world through my pain, it bends everything I see." The old monk smiled. "Yes. And when you stop trying to clear the water too quickly, it clears itself." Tenzin bowed deeply. "But how do I keep it clear?" "You don't," said the master. "You let it rain." Weeks passed. Tenzin began to notice how rain touched everything equally. Stone, soil, leaf, and roof. It didn't choose where to fall. It didn't judge who deserved it. He began to practice compassion that way, not directed only toward those who were kind to him, but toward everyone who had ever caused him pain, including himself. When he prayed, he whispered, "May my heart rain softly on all beings, those who bloom and those still buried." One day, a traveler arrived at the monastery. He was cold, angry, and soaked from the storm. He shouted at the monks for not offering shelter quickly enough. The others avoided him, but Tenzin approached, offering him a towel and tea. The man grumbled, "Why are you kind to me?" "I was rude to you," Tenzin smiled gently. "When the rain falls," he said, "does it choose which roof to touch?" The man stared, speechless. Then slowly, his shoulders softened. He drank the tea and wept quietly. Outside, the rain continued, a steady heartbeat against the temple walls. That evening, Tenzin walked back to the well. The surface reflected the moon now, calm and complete. He realized that his heart, too, had become a mirror, not of perfection, but of acceptance. Every face he saw, kind or cruel, was simply another reflection of himself, another drop of rain in the same vast cloud. He whispered to the night, "Thank you for teaching me to see myself everywhere." The next morning, the sky cleared. Mist lifted from the mountains like breath. The air smelled new, clean, awake. The master found Tenzin sweeping the courtyard. "You've been up early," the old man said. Tenzin nodded. "After the rain, the earth looks different." The master smiled. "No, my son. After the rain, you look different." As they worked, the master pointed to the well. "Do you see it? The water still reflects the sky, but now the rain has left." Tenzin watched the surface shimmer under sunlight. "It's beautiful," he whispered. The master nodded. "That is your mind, calm, open, full of sky. But remember, storms will come again. Do not pray for no rain. Pray to remember the sky even when it falls." That evening, as the sun sank behind the peaks, Tenzin sat once more by the window. The air was still. The candle burned steady. He thought of the man he had helped, the rain that had cleansed, the pain that had taught. He realized that life was not a battle between dark and light, joy and sorrow, gain and loss. It was one continuous rainfall, each drop nourishing something unseen. He whispered, "May I always see the sky in the storm." And for the first time, he understood why the Buddha smiled. Not because the world was free of suffering, but because he could finally see through it. In Buddhism, there's a saying, "When you understand your suffering, compassion is born." That night, as the stars returned above the mountain, Tenzin placed his palms together and bowed to the soundless air. Somewhere, in the silence that follows rain, he could still hear it. The echo of every drop that ever fell, still singing in his heart. And he smiled, knowing the rain had never left. It had only become him. Tenzin learned that suffering is not the enemy. It is the rain that reveals what we reflect. And when we stop running from the storm, we discover that compassion isn't born from avoiding pain, but from understanding it. If the monk's lesson was found in rain, the next story belongs to one who found truth through movement. A dancer who learned that freedom is not in the motion itself, but in the stillness that guides it. The dancer of empty space. In a quiet studio above a forgotten street in Paris, a woman named Amara danced alone. The room smelled faintly of wood and rain, the scent of years spent chasing rhythm and grace. Outside, the city moved with its usual urgency, but inside, time moved differently. Every creak of the floor, every echo of her steps, was a conversation with silence. Amara had been a dancer since she could walk. By 16, she was the youngest soloist in her company. By 25, she had danced on stages brighter than she could have dreamed. Every leap, every spin, every ovation had fed her hunger to be flawless. But perfection, she learned, is a flame that burns the hand that holds it. The more she achieved, the emptier she felt. Every performance left her wondering, who am I when the music stops? One evening, after a particularly demanding show, she stood backstage staring at her reflection. Sweat glistened on her skin, her heart still racing from applause. But the woman in the mirror looked tired. Not the kind of tired sleep can fix, but the kind born from being trapped inside one's own shadow. The next day, Amara told her director she needed time away. She packed a single suitcase and left the city. For the first time in her life, she had no rehearsals, no performances, no expectations. She traveled south to a small coastal village where the sea and sky met like endless breath. There, she rented a tiny room above a bakery, its windows overlooking the ocean. She thought she would rest, but the stillness frightened her. Without music, she didn't know who to be. Her body twitched with invisible rhythms. Her mind replayed steps she no longer wanted to master. She realized she hadn't been dancing with life. She had been dancing against it. One morning, she walked down to the beach just before sunrise. The tide had retreated, leaving a vast expanse of wet sand. The world was quiet, except for the slow breathing of the waves. Without thinking, Amara began to move. No music, no choreography, just the sea, the wind, and her body remembering what it meant to be free. Her feet left soft imprints that filled instantly with water. The air was cool, her hair tangled, her heart unguarded. For the first time, she wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to be graceful. She was simply being moved. An old fisherman watched her from the rocks. When she stopped to rest, he smiled and said, "You dance like someone listening to something I can't hear." She laughed. "Maybe I'm just hearing what was always there." He nodded. The sea doesn't try to dance, yet everything it touches moves. That evening, she wrote in her journal, "Maybe I've been chasing rhythm when I was meant to follow silence. Maybe dance isn't movement at all, but the space between two breaths." She began spending every dawn by the water, not practicing, but surrendering. Some mornings she sat still, watching gulls trace circles in the air. Some mornings she let the wind lead her steps. The boundaries between body and world began to blur. She could no longer tell where she ended and the horizon began. One rainy afternoon, a group of children saw her moving on the beach and joined in, laughing and spinning beside her. Their motions were wild, uneven, full of joy. Amara found herself laughing too, because in their clumsy rhythm, she saw something pure. None of them cared how they looked. They didn't dance to express themselves. They danced because they were alive. That night, Amara cried, not from sadness, but from remembering what her art had once been. A celebration, not a performance. Months passed. When spring came, she returned to the city. Her director welcomed her back with surprise. "You look different," he said. "Older, but lighter." "I stopped trying to be the dance," she said softly. "I just let the dance be me." Her first performance after returning was unlike any she had ever given. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight glowed. The audience waited for the grand entrance. But when the music began, Amara didn't rush into the movement. She stood still. The world held its breath, and then a slow, gentle gesture, a turn that felt like prayer. Each motion arose and vanished like a wave touching sand. People said afterward that it was as if the air itself was dancing. They couldn't explain it, but they felt peace. Amara smiled when she heard that. It was no longer her goal to impress. only to remind others of what they already knew, that beauty isn't something you make, it's something you allow. After the show, a young dancer approached her. "Your movements, they felt like breathing," the girl said. "How do you do that?" Amara smiled. "By remembering that the breath moves everything, even stillness." She touched the girl's hand and added, "When you stop trying to control the dance begins to control you, gently like the tide." That night, Amara walked alone through the city. The streets shimmered with rain. She saw her reflection in a puddle, distorted, beautiful, alive. She whispered, "Thank you for teaching me that emptiness isn't absence, it's freedom." In Buddhism, there is a saying, "The dancer disappears, but the dance remains." Amara finally understood. All her life, she had tried to leave her mark on the stage, but the stage had never needed her mark. It only needed her presence. And presence, she realized, wasn't something she performed. It was what she became when she stopped trying to be anyone at all. The next morning, she woke to sunlight spilling across her floor. She stretched, breathed, and smiled. Her body no longer ached from effort, only from gratitude. She didn't know if she would ever dance on stage again. And for the first time, that didn't matter. Because wherever she went, the space around her moved like music, and her heart beat in rhythm with the world. Amara learned that dance is not a movement of the body, but a surrender of the self, a soft conversation between breath and emptiness. And just as motion reveals stillness, connection reveals the unseen threads that hold us together. If Amara found unity through rhythm, the next story belongs to those invisible bonds, the threads between hearts that continue to vibrate, even across distance and silence. The thread between hearts. Some say we are separated by oceans, by miles, by time, but the truth is softer. We are connected by something invisible, a thread that doesn't break, even when silence stretches between us. This is the story of two people who never stopped being part of each other's breath. When she was a child, Lena loved to fly kites with her grandfather. He would take her to the open field at the edge of town, where the wind came freely from the sea. "Do you see the string?" he'd ask, holding it up to the light. "It looks fragile, doesn't it?" She'd nod. "But it's strong enough to hold the sky," he'd say, smiling. She didn't understand then, but years later, those words would echo through her life. Her grandfather passed away when she was 17. The day of his funeral, it rained. That quiet kind of rain that feels like someone whispering your name. When everyone had left the cemetery, Lena stayed behind. She held one of his old kites, red and worn, its tail tangled with faded ribbons. She tried to fly it one last time, but the air was still, and the kite refused to rise. She whispered, "I'll keep trying," and from somewhere inside the silence, she almost thought she heard him say, "I know." Years passed. Lena became an artist. She painted skies, wide, endless, filled with light. Every canvas felt like a conversation with him. But even as her work gained recognition, a part of her felt hollow. as if the world had grown louder and the thread between them had gone quiet. One autumn afternoon, she found herself walking through the same field where they once flew kites. The grass was taller now, the air colder. She sat down, her sketchbook on her knees, and began to draw without thinking. When she looked down, she saw what she had drawn, a single line stretching upward into the clouds, and a small hand holding it from below. It was the kite. It was him. And for the first time in years, she felt him close, not as a memory, but as a presence. That night, she dreamt of a vast sky filled with lanterns floating upward. Each lantern carried a thin golden thread connecting it to the ground. When she woke, she could still feel the warmth in her chest, as if something had been mended while she slept. She realized that love, like those threads, doesn't end when the hands let go. It just becomes invisible. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, a monk named Rin was restoring an old monastery. As he worked, he found an ancient tapestry buried beneath dust and time. Its fabric was fragile, but the design still glowed faintly. 1,000 interwoven threads forming the image of a single lotus blooming from light. He noticed something curious. Each thread had once been dyed a different color, but now, after centuries, they all shared the same golden hue. He smiled. Perhaps this is how the heart ages. Each experience, each sorrow, turning into compassion. He began to repair the tapestry, weaving new thread into old. And though he had never met Lena, his hands trembled with the same quiet tenderness that she had felt holding her grandfather's kite. One evening, as Rin worked by candlelight, a gust of wind entered through the open window, making the flame dance wildly. He looked up, and for a moment, he saw something impossible. A red kite, drifting across the night sky outside the monastery. He blinked. It was gone. But in his heart, he felt a sudden, inexplicable warmth, as if someone somewhere had just remembered him. He smiled. "Threads travel far," he whispered. That same night, Lena couldn't sleep. She walked to her window and looked up at the stars. Something told her to paint. She set up her easel and began to work without sketch or plan, just movement, breath, and intuition. By dawn, her canvas glowed with a strange image, a monastery under the moon, its windows lit like small candles, and above it, a single red kite. She stepped back, stunned. She had never been to such a place, and yet, it felt familiar. She signed the painting, "The Thread Between Hearts." A month later, she displayed the piece in a small gallery in Kyoto. It was her first exhibition outside her country. During the opening, a quiet monk in brown robes entered the room. He stood for a long time in front of the red kite painting, his eyes glistening with wonder. When she approached him, he bowed and said, "I have seen this sky." She laughed softly. "That's impossible," he smiled. "Not impossible, only unseen." He told her about the tapestry he had been restoring and how he'd seen a red kite in the wind that same night. They stood there in silence, both understanding what words could not explain. Finally, Lena said, "Maybe we were both part of the same thread." The monk nodded. "All hearts are." That evening, they walked to the river near the city's edge. It was the last night of a lantern festival. People were setting small lights afloat, each carrying prayers, memories, names. Lena lit one for her grandfather. Rin lit one for all the hearts that had ever touched his own. They placed them on the water, watching as the two lanterns drifted side by side until they became one reflection in the dark current. Neither of them spoke. The silence said enough. In Buddhism, there's a teaching. We are like jewels in a net, each reflecting the other endlessly. To touch one is to move them all. Lena and Rin understood then that connection doesn't depend on closeness. It depends on awareness, the quiet recognition that your joy, your sorrow, your breath belong to something larger than yourself. Years later, when Rin's monastery was finally restored, he hung the finished tapestry in the main hall. Right at its center, he had woven a small red thread, a single line reaching upward, like a kite string, and thousands of miles away in Lena's studio, the same red thread hung across the window, a piece of silk she'd saved from that exhibition in Kyoto. When the wind blew, it swayed gently, and though neither of them knew it, the movement of one thread stirred the other. Perhaps that's how the universe breathes, through invisible ties, through unseen hands, through love that travels in ways we cannot trace. And maybe right now, someone far away is smiling because you thought of them. Lena and Rin learned that distance is an illusion, that every act of care, every thought of love travels farther than we'll ever see. For what connects us isn't the sound of our voices, but the quiet vibration of our hearts. If this story was about the thread between souls, the next one belongs to the wind that carries them. The wind that forgets its name, and in forgetting, remembers what it truly is. The wind that forgot its name. There was once a wind that lived between the mountains. It was gentle in spring, wild in autumn, a traveler that touched everything yet belonged nowhere. People gave it many names. Some called it the Whisperer, others the Wanderer, some even the Storm. And for a while, the wind believed them. It began to think of itself as what others said it was. A bringer of change, a destroyer, a comforter, a curse. But names, like leaves, can never hold the sky. Far below the mountains, in a small valley, there lived a boy named Kai. He loved to stand on the hill outside his village and feel the wind move through his hair. He would spread his arms wide and shout, "Take me with you!" The wind laughed, a soft, invisible ripple. It liked this boy. Every time Kai called, it returned, sweeping through the grass in a golden rush. They became companions. The boy who dreamed of flying and the wind that dreamed of resting. Years passed. Kai grew older, and like most who grow, he forgot to listen. The village became busy. There were fields to tend, markets to fill, promises to keep. One day, as Kai worked, a storm rolled in. The same wind that had once played with him now howled through the valley, tearing at rooftops and trees. People shouted, "Curse this wind! It brings only destruction." And the wind, hearing their words, felt shame for the first time. It fled the valley, hiding high among the mountains. There, it wandered for seasons. Without names, without laughter, it began to forget itself. It no longer danced through leaves or brushed over rivers. It became heavy, almost still, and yet, even in that stillness, it could hear faint echoes. A child's voice calling through memory. "Take me with you." The wind sighed. Who am I now? Am I the storm they fear, or the breath that once gave them joy. But the mountains were silent. Only the snow listened. One winter evening, the wind drifted down to a frozen lake. The surface was clear as glass. For the first time, the wind saw itself, not as air, but as reflection. When it moved, the ice sang softly, a low, resonant tone like a bell. The sound reminded the wind of something ancient, a time before names, before shapes, when it was simply movement, not a storm, not a breeze, just life, it whispered. Maybe I was never meant to be anything at all. In the nearby village, Kai had grown old. His hair was silver now, his hands marked with time. One night, he dreamt of the hill where he used to play. In the dream, he felt the wind again, gentle, familiar, full of stories. When he awoke, tears filled his eyes. He hadn't realized how much he missed that presence, the invisible friend that had carried his childhood laughter into the clouds. He rose before dawn and walked back to the hill. The air was cold, the world silent except for the faint stirring above the trees. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Old friend, are you still there?" High among the peaks, the wind heard him. For a long time, it hesitated. It had forgotten how to be gentle. It had forgotten its own name. But then, something within it softened. The memory of the boy's open arms, the laughter carried across fields, the feeling of being free. The wind moved down the slopes, through the valley, past sleeping forests and glimmering streams. When it reached the hill, it touched Kai's face with the tenderness of recognition. He smiled. "I knew you'd come back." The wind swirled around him, a soundless embrace. Kai whispered, "Do you know who you are?" And the wind replied, not in words, but in a feeling that filled the air. "I am the breath that moves through all things." In that moment, Kai understood. He breathed in deeply and the wind breathed with him. There was no separation, just one endless inhale and exhale, shared between the world and itself. He whispered, "You were never lost. You were just everywhere." The wind laughed, soft, childlike, and for the first time in centuries, it felt peace. When spring came, the valley flourished again. The people still spoke of the wind, but now their voices carried gratitude. They had learned that the same force that bends trees also carries the seeds that make new ones grow. That destruction and renewal are not enemies, but partners in an eternal dance. As for the wind, it no longer cared what it was called. It flowed through mountains and deserts, villages and oceans, singing softly through every crack of existence. It brushed across a monk's cheek as he prayed, kissed the surface of a lantern drifting on a river, carried the scent of bread from a baker's window, and whispered through the dreams of a child. Everywhere it went, it reminded the world that freedom begins where identity ends. In Buddhism, there's a saying, "Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form." The wind understood. It was never separate from the mountain or the tree or the breath of the old man. It was all of them and none of them. And in forgetting its name, it remembered its nature. That night, high above the world, the wind rested at last, moving not to be seen, but simply to exist. It flowed through the stars, through silence, through the space between one heartbeat and the next. And if you listen closely, you might hear it now, in the sigh of the night, the rustle of your curtains, the quiet pulse behind your breath. That is the wind. the one that forgot its name, so it could remember yours. The wind learned that freedom isn't found in identity, but in the gentle act of being. And when you stop naming yourself, life begins to speak through you. If the wind story was about the formless, the next one will be about transformation, about learning to flow through change without fear or resistance, like a river that forgets the sky above and becomes it. The river inside the sky. There was once a river that longed to reach the sky. It began high in the mountains, born from melting snow and the breath of clouds. For years, it sang its way through valleys, feeding forests, cradling villages, reflecting the faces of those who stopped to drink from it. But deep within its current, a quiet yearning grew. Why must I always move downward? It whispered to the rocks. Why do the clouds float free above me while I am bound to the earth? The rocks said nothing. They simply held the river as it passed, patiently shaping its path, as if to say, the way down is also the way home. The river flowed on, restless. It envied the freedom of the sky, its vastness, its weightlessness, its endless blue. Each time it saw its own reflection shimmering under sunlight, it thought, if I could only rise, I would finally be infinite. So it tried. It hurled itself off cliffs, raged in storms, roared through canyons, believing power could lift it. But the harder it tried, the heavier it became. One day, it reached the edge of the desert, a place where water vanished into heat. The land was cracked, silent, a mirror of exhaustion. For the first time, the river felt fear. If I keep moving, I'll disappear. But a soft voice answered, not from outside, but from within its own ripples. Maybe that's not the end, but the beginning. The river hesitated. Could vanishing be a kind of arrival? The sun rose higher. Its warmth kissed the river's surface, turning droplets into mist. At first, the river wept, watching itself fade into air. But as it dissolved, it felt lighter, freer. What was once liquid now became breath. And as the wind carried it upward, the river realized it was rising. Not as water, but as vapor, as cloud, as sky. From above, it looked down at the path it once carved, the forests, the villages, the deserts, and felt a deep tenderness. Everything it had touched was still there, still alive. It whispered, I never lost anything. I only changed form. Days passed. The river, now a cloud, drifted across mountains and oceans. It saw everything from a new height. The world was no longer divided between below and above, earth and heaven. It was all one vast movement, the dance of becoming and returning. The river smiled. It no longer wanted to possess the sky. It was the sky, but soon the air grew heavy. The cloud darkened with rain. And as thunder rumbled in the distance, the river understood what rises must also fall. For a moment, fear returned. Will I lose myself again? It whispered. But then it remembered the rock's silent wisdom, the voice within its current, the truth it had seen from above. To fall was not to vanish. It was to give, and so it let go. Raindrops formed and began their descent, tiny mirrors, each reflecting the entire world. They fell on leaves, on rooftops, on the outstretched hands of children. One drop landed on the cheek of an old woman who looked up at the sky and smiled, whispering, "Welcome back." The river shivered with joy. It had traveled across time and space only to return to the same love it had always known. Later that night, as the rain quieted, a monk walked through the temple courtyard, feeling each drop on his skin. He raised his face to the clouds and murmured, "The rain is the river is the cloud is the breath of the world." And in that simple prayer, the cycle completed itself. A circle with no beginning, no end. Far away, a small child scooped a puddle into his hands, laughing as it slipped through his fingers. He didn't know he was touching the sky. He only knew it felt alive. The river watched, and for the first time, it understood the meaning of peace, not holding on, but knowing you can never be lost. As dawn broke, mist rose again from the fields, soft ribbons of vapor rising to meet the morning. The river whispered to itself, "I have been the mountain, I have been the cloud, I have been the drop and the ocean, and through it all, I have always been the same." It had finally found what it was searching for. Not infinity above, but infinity within. In Buddhism, there's a teaching. What you are seeking is what is looking. The river understood now. The sky it longed for had never been outside. It had always been its own reflection. The awareness beneath every wave, the stillness beneath every storm. It smiled through the rainlight and whispered, "Freedom is not in reaching the sky. Freedom is realizing the sky was never apart from me." That evening, as sunlight broke through the last clouds, a rainbow arched across the valley, a bridge of color between earth and heaven. People looked up in awe, children pointed. But the river, now both rain and mist, just laughed softly in the wind. It no longer needed to be seen, it was everywhere. In the breath of the earth, the shimmer of the air, the silence of the sky, and if you listen closely, you might hear it too. The quiet murmur that rises after rain, the hum that says, "You are not the drop, you are the whole sky remembering itself." The river learned that transformation is not loss. It's the return of form to essence, that letting go is not falling apart, but falling into everything. If the river's story was about returning, the next one will be about remembrance, about the stillness that gathers all stories, the silence that holds the echo of every breath. The silence that remembers. There is a silence that doesn't erase. It doesn't take away sound. It holds it, the way the ocean holds the echo of every wave that ever touched its surface. It is the silence before you were born, the silence that listens when you pray, the silence that remains after every goodbye. That silence remembers you. Somewhere at the edge of the world, a woman named Grace sat beneath an ancient Bodhi tree. The ground beneath her was cool, covered with fallen leaves that whispered when the wind passed. She had been sitting there since dawn, not seeking enlightenment, just resting. The years had softened her face but brightened her eyes. Peace had found her the way sunlight finds still water, quietly, naturally, without effort. She closed her eyes and breathed, and as her breath deepened, the world around her began to hum. Not with noise, but with presence. The sound of the river nearby, the rustle of wings, the whisper of air moving through the trees. They blended into a single, infinite note. Grace smiled. It was the same sound she had once heard long ago by a lake at dusk. The moment she realized that silence is not empty, it is full of everything. Then, like ripples through still water, memories began to return. Not as thoughts, but as living presences. She saw Aiden, standing on the bridge of time, learning to stop running. Sofia, finally at peace in her unfinished room. Eli speaking with his shadow and smiling. The potter shaping imperfection into grace. The farmer by the flowing river. The musician playing for compassion. The monk bowing to the rain. The dancer breathing through stillness. The lantern maker. The child with the kite. The wind. The river that became the sky. Each one shimmered like starlight through her mind, not as separate lives, but as different faces of the same truth. They were all part of one great unfolding, one story remembering itself. Grace placed her palms together and whispered, "Thank you," because now she understood. The world is not made of beginnings and endings. It is made of moments that keep returning, changed, yet eternal. The silence within her heart was the same silence within theirs. And in that stillness, every lesson she had ever learned began to bloom again, like seeds that had been waiting for rain. She remembered what Aiden had said. Peace doesn't wait for the perfect moment to arrive. She remembered the lantern maker's wisdom. Light does not chase the dark, it embraces it. She remembered the monk's prayer. When you understand your suffering, compassion is born. And she remembered the wind's laughter. In forgetting my name, I remembered yours, every voice returned, woven into the same song. The music of letting go. Grace listened and realized that what she called her life was never just hers. It was the collective breath of countless beings, seen and unseen, living and gone, each whispering the same ancient truth. We are not separate. The wind picked up slightly, and the leaves above her began to move. A soft applause from the trees. Grace opened her eyes and looked up. The light filtered through the branches like threads of gold. She could almost see the invisible strings that connected everything. Leaf to sky, root to earth, breath to silence. The world was breathing together, one vast organism of awareness. She laughed softly. "So this is it," she said. "The silence that remembers." Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Grace walked to the riverbank. The water glowed with the colors of dusk, rose, gold, indigo. She knelt and touched the surface. Ripples spread outward, and for a brief moment, her reflection broke apart. 1,000 fragments of light dancing across the current. She whispered, "Even in pieces, I am whole." She stayed there as night arrived. The stars appeared, one by one, like old friends returning after a long journey. Each one seemed to hold a story, a lesson, a life, a memory of kindness. She felt the weight of gratitude rise in her chest, not the heavy kind that demands repayment, but the gentle kind that says, "I was here, I saw, I loved, and that was enough." In Buddhism, there is a saying, "The mind, when still, mirrors all things, and in mirroring, it becomes them." Grace finally understood. Silence doesn't just remember, it becomes what it remembers. It holds every joy, every loss, every birth, every death, not as burdens, but as the fabric of being itself. Every laugh you've ever heard, every tear you've ever shed is still echoing somewhere in the universe. Nothing is lost. Nothing ever was. The moon rose high. Grace closed her eyes again, feeling her breath slow, her heartbeat soften. And in that stillness, she heard the voice of the wind, faint but clear. You are not the silence's listener. You are its song, she smiled. The boundaries between her and the night dissolved. There was no self to hold, no world to leave behind, only awareness, vast, loving, timeless. The same awareness that had once been Aiden's pause, Sofia's acceptance, Eli's forgiveness, and the lantern maker's compassion, all returning to the same source. As dawn approached, the sky began to pale, the moment before light and darkness shake hands. Grace whispered one last time, "If you can hear this silence, you're already home." And as the first bird sang, the sound didn't break the silence. It completed it. The river flowed quietly beside her, carrying the reflection of the sky. And within that reflection, if you looked closely enough, you might have seen her smile, not of parting, but of remembrance. Because Grace was no longer the one who remembered. She had become the silence itself. Grace learned that silence is not the end of sound. It is its continuation in another form. That remembering is not holding on. It is loving so deeply that even letting go feels like a blessing. If this silence carried every story, the next one carries every breath. The rhythm that binds sky and earth, birth and death, you and me. The breath that binds all things. There is something that moves through all things, gentle as the tide, invisible as light before dawn, endless as time itself. It is the one rhythm that never stops, the pulse behind every heartbeat, the whisper beneath every prayer. Some call it life, some call it God. The wise simply call it breath. Long ago, before names were spoken, before mountains learned to rise and oceans learned to fall, there was only the great inhaling and exhaling, the universe breathing itself awake. Every star was a spark in that breath, every river a sigh returning home, every living thing a note in the same eternal song. And though we forget, we never leave it, for we are not the breathers. We are the breath being breathed. Somewhere in a small temple by the sea, a monk named Arun tended to the lamps at dusk. He was old now, his hair silver as the moonlight outside. Each evening, he sat before the altar and listened, not to sound, but to silence moving. When asked why he prayed in silence, he smiled and said, "Because everything that can be said is already being whispered through the breath." One night, as the waves crashed gently beyond the temple walls, Arun felt his breath become heavy, his body tired easily these days. He wondered if this was the beginning of his last season, but there was no fear. Only curiosity. He wanted to understand what happens to the breath when the body can no longer hold it. He closed his eyes and began to listen to the rising and falling of his lungs, the way a sailor listens to the tide. In, out, in, out. Each inhale was the world arriving. Each exhale was the world returning. As his breathing deepened, he began to sense something extraordinary. With each inhale, he could feel the ocean entering him, salt, wind, moonlight, as if the sea itself was breathing through his chest. With each exhale, he could feel his breath leaving the temple, carrying warmth into the night air, mingling with the rhythm of the waves. He smiled. There is no border between my lungs and the sea. The boundary between body and world began to soften. The sound of his pulse merged with the sound of the tide. The flicker of his candle matched the rhythm of his heart. The line between inside and outside dissolved until there was only one breath, moving through everything, Aaron whispered. So this is what it means to belong. He remembered something his master had once told him. Breathing is the bridge between form and formlessness. When you follow it far enough, you disappear into both. He began to feel himself dissolving, not dying but widening. His awareness stretched beyond skin, beyond the temple walls, out into the sleeping village, over the fields and rivers, into the vastness of the night. He could feel every living being breathing. The mother feeding her child, the fisherman mending his nets, the dog dreaming beside the door. Every inhale, every exhale, a shared pulse of existence. He whispered, all this time, we were one breath pretending to be many. As he sat there, a small candle flickered near his altar. Its flame rose and fell with his breathing. And for a moment, he saw in it the faces of those who had come before. Grace under the Bodhi tree, Aiden on his bridge, Sofia with her unfinished room, the lantern maker, the monk of rain, the dancer, the river, all of them breathing together, woven through time like threads of air. Their stories were not separate lives, but inhalations and exhalations of the same cosmic rhythm. Aaron's breath slowed, but the world's breath continued. The ocean breathed for him. The trees breathed for him. The stars expanded and contracted with him. He realized that even death was just another form of breathing, a great exhale into infinity. He whispered, if I am the breath, then how can I ever stop? Suddenly, he felt a stillness so vast that it wasn't silence, it was fullness. A silence that didn't end sound, but contained it. The same silence that Grace had known, that the river had returned to, that the wind had become. And in that silence, he heard it. A hum that was not a sound, but a memory. The hum of the universe inhaling. The hum of life remembering itself. He began to weep, not from sorrow, but from recognition. He saw that every act of kindness, every moment of love, was the breath pausing to notice itself. That when we help another breathe easier, through compassion, forgiveness, presence, we are the universe calming its own lungs, he whispered. Every time one heart softens, the whole world exhales in relief. The night grew colder. The flame dimmed, but Aaron felt no need to hold on. He knew now that breathing had never belonged to him. He was simply its passing form, a flute in the hands of the infinite. He smiled. I am not the player, he said. I am the note. In Buddhism, it is said, the breath is the doorway to liberation. Follow it, and it will lead you home. As the first light of dawn crept across the horizon, Aaron took one final, effortless inhale. And when he exhaled, the wind outside stirred, softly, tenderly, as if the world itself had sighed. Some say that on certain mornings, when the sea is still and the air warm, you can hear a faint rhythm in the breeze by that old temple. It sounds like a man breathing, or perhaps the earth itself remembering. You breathe in now. The air enters your lungs, ancient, borrowed, sacred. You breathe out. The air leaves you, but it does not disappear. It becomes the breath of another. This is the thread that binds us, from stone to tree, to star to soul. One breath moving through countless forms, forever exhaling itself into being. And when you finally stop searching for peace, you will realize you have been breathing it all along. Aaron's breath became the world's breath, a rhythm that never ends, only changes form. And when we remember that our next inhale is someone else's exhale, we begin to live with tenderness. If this story was about unity, the next will be about light, the final glow beyond letting go, where awareness itself smiles and rests as everything. The light beyond letting go. There is a light that does not burn, a flame that shines without needing a wick. It lives quietly behind every breath, beneath every heartbeat, beyond every moment you've ever called yours. It is not the light of the sun or the stars, but the light that allows them to be seen, the light of awareness itself, the one that never leaves, even when everything else fades. When the monk Arun took his final breath, the world did not fall silent. The ocean still moved, the wind still sang, and the morning light entered the temple with a softness that felt like gratitude. The flame of his candle had gone out, but the glow lingered, not on the wick, but in the air. Some said it was just the sun rising. Others swore the light stayed longer that morning, as if time itself had paused to bow. Far away, Grace awoke in her small hut by the lake. She didn't know why, but her eyes opened at the exact moment Aaron exhaled his last breath. The air in her room felt warm, filled with a golden stillness. She sat up, pressed her palms together and whispered, "Someone has gone home." The world continued. But something had changed. Subtle, immeasurable, like a bell still vibrating long after it's been struck. Children laughed by the river. Farmers tended their fields. The wind moved gently through bamboo groves. Everything seemed softer, as though the world itself had remembered to breathe. That night, Grace dreamed. She was walking along an endless horizon of light. Not white, not gold, but something beyond color. It pulsed gently, like the space between two heartbeats. There, she saw them all. Aiden, Sofia, Eli, Hero, the lantern maker, Amara the dancer, Tenzin the monk, the wind, the river, the potter, the farmer, and the countless souls whose stories had once brushed hers. Each of them was made of light, but not separate lights. They were threads of the same radiance, flowing in and out of one another, like waves made of sunshine, and at the center of it all, a stillness so pure that it glowed without moving. Grace approached the light and whispered, "Is this heaven?" And the light replied, "There is no place to go, only what has always been here." It spoke not in words, but in understanding, a warmth that moved through her like breath. She realized then she had not died. She had awakened. The light showed her every life, every joy, every sorrow, each moment she thought she had lost. They were all here, not as memories, but as colors in the same eternal painting. The mistakes, the grief, the laughter. None were erased. They had all been transformed into gold, woven into the same tapestry of being. Grace wept softly. "Was it all for this?" she asked, and the light replied, "It was never about reaching here. It was about realizing you never left." She felt her heart dissolve, not into nothingness, but into everything: the lake, the stars, the breath of others sleeping, the wind through the leaves, the warmth of a candle somewhere far away. She could feel the entire world moving inside her, and herself moving inside the world. There was no longer grace, only the grace of existence itself. She remembered the monk's final words: "You are not the listener, you are the song." And now she could hear the music everywhere, in the hum of atoms, in the silence between raindrops, in the space where love and loss meet and bow to each other. The light whispered, "This is what it means to let go, not to vanish, but to become so vast that nothing is outside of you." Back in the waking world, the morning sun touched the earth with tenderness. In the village, people noticed how bright the day felt, how calm the wind was, how the birds sang as if carrying a message. They didn't know that across oceans, a monk's last breath and a woman's final awakening had become the same wave of light passing through them all. That evening, a child stood by the river, watching the water reflect the sunset. She asked her mother, "Why does the light dance on the river?" Her mother smiled, "Because the river is learning to remember the sky." The child nodded, then whispered, "I think the light remembers me too." In Buddhism, it is said, "The awakened one is not a person. It is the light within all beings recognizing itself." And perhaps that's what the world was doing now, recognizing itself through wind and water, through grief and grace, through the endless rhythm of letting go and becoming. That night, Grace's hut by the lake stood quiet. Inside, her cup still sat on the table, half filled with tea, the surface reflecting the moon. Outside, the crickets sang. A soft breeze moved the curtain, and if you were there, you might have seen something beautiful, a faint shimmer of golden dust in the air, like sunlight remembering itself in the dark. Everything was still, everything was whole, the world had exhaled, and in that breath, the light beyond letting go continued to shine, not from the heavens, but from within everything that exists. The candle, the water, the stars. You, take a deep breath now. Inhale softly, feel the air entering you. The same air that once moved through grace, through Aaron, through mountains and rivers, through every soul that ever was. Exhale gently. You are not sending the breath away. You are sharing it. You are part of the great rhythm, the light breathing through form, the universe inhaling its own reflection. And as you rest, the light rests with you, because it has nowhere else to be. It has always been here. The quiet glow inside your chest, the smile that rises without reason, the love that remains when all stories end. So sleep now, not as someone trying to find peace, but as peace itself. The sky is within you, the river flows through you, the wind sings your name, and the light, the one beyond all letting go, is already home. If this light brought you calm tonight, let your heart rest here for a while. You don't need to do anything, just breathe and let the stillness hold you. May peace find you again tomorrow in every gentle breath, in every quiet moment of your day. If you wish to return to this sanctuary, remember to subscribe so the light can find its way back to you. Until then, sleep softly and let the universe breathe through you.